Chapter 701, Communication and Planning. Happy New Year, and all the best to everyone. The forest lay shrouded in darkness. Only the occasional chirp of insects pierced the stillness, casting an eerie hush over the trees. Yet Nathan felt no fear. He'd marched through countless nightmarish battlefields and endured grueling training sessions in environments far harsher than this. This was familiar territory. Calmly, he reached up and loosened the guardian seal at the center of his brow. Closing his eyes, he centered his mind, then reopened them, revealing the pale, almost luminescent whiteness that marked his heightened perception. He scanned the woods in all directions. After several long heartbeats, he confirmed that there was no one, no living soul, within at least a kilometer. Satisfied, he reformed the seal. Connecting mentally to the chakra link he'd established earlier, he prepared to send his will across the distance. Drawing in a steady breath, he performed the heart communication technique, projecting his thoughts outward toward his shadow clone. In the hidden village of Takigakure, a single wooden house stood quiet under the night sky. Inside, Mizutani Yuichi, masquerading perfectly as Nathan's shadow clone, lay motionless on a tatami mat. Then, without warning, his eyes snapped open. Yuichi's gaze sharpened as Nathan's words, carried on the chakra current, flooded his mind. The plan was in motion. Now it was time to see it through. He didn't speak at once or make any overt move that might draw attention. Instead, he withdrew his chakra senses and, once he was certain no one was nearby, quietly opened a mental link with Nathan. Under normal circumstances, if he'd been able to use the Flying Thunder God technique to teleport right beside him, their connection would have been even clearer, but that wasn't an option. After all, the hidden waterfall village may be small by Shinobi standards, but from its founding, it managed to host a tailed beast, the formidable Seven Tails. That alone speaks volumes about the village's technical prowess. We'll see more proof of it later, once we learn how Fu handles her own Jinchuriki power. Even Gara, the One-Tail's Jinchuriki, was so deeply affected by Shukaku that he lost control on more than one occasion. Fu carries the even stronger Seven Tails within her, yet she performs just like an ordinary child. External factors certainly play a role, but the finesse of the sealing jutsu is crucial. After all, both Jinchuriki are still kids, and Nathan doesn't believe their sheer willpower could differ that dramatically. Nathan understood all too well that sheer force of will couldn't resist the corrosive influence of a tailed beast's chakra. No matter how strong the Jinchuriki's resolve, only a masterful sealing technique could hold the beast in check. And of all the great shinobi nations, Takigakure's sealing art ranked among the very best, surpassing even Tsunagakure's renowned methods. That alone spoke volumes about the village's strength and heritage. Yet strength bred vigilance. Now, more than ever, Takigakure's borders were locked down with impenetrable defenses, hidden barriers woven into every approach. Nathan had no desire to trigger alarms or face dozens of high-level seals when he executed the Flying Thunder God technique. He needed to coordinate with his shadow clone inside the village, swiftly, silently, and at a safe distance. Time was on their side. Within the dense expanse of the forest, Nathan formed hand seals, focusing his chakra into a low-frequency transmission that stretched across dozens of kilometers. On the other end, his clone wove the corresponding seals, tapping into the wire-thin connection between them. Moments later, Nathan opened his eyes. A spark of determination lit his gaze. The plan was in motion. Soon, he and his counterpart would be poised to breach Takigakure's barriers without ever setting foot on the front line, and the village wouldn't know what hit it. Nathan's prediction proved correct. No urgent messages had come from his shadow clones in the past 3 days, which meant the operation was still running smoothly. The latest report confirmed it. The seven-tailed beast's transplantation had not yet even begun. With that reassurance, a wave of relief washed over him. Before anything else, he spoke into thin air. Mizutani Yuichi clone, I want immediate notification the moment you detect any movement. Satisfied, Nathan severed the mental link, then methodically wiped away every trace of his presence. With a single hand seal, he activated the Flying Thunder God technique and vanished from the compound. Moments later, Nathan reappeared inside his camp tent. He dispelled the final shadow clone and sat cross-legged on the floor. First, he worked through the disciplined forms of the Palm Immortal technique. Then he transitioned into the centering breaths of the Reflection Heart technique. He resisted the urge to drill any additional jutsu. Conserving chakra was vital, just in case the Cloud Ninja decided to launch an unexpected counterattack. Night had fallen before either Konoha or Kumogakure found any rest. Along the entire front, shinobi from both villages formed into small squads, each waiting for the signal to strike. In truth, Konoha's preparations were impeccable, and they had achieved total surprise. In the first half of the night, the two sides traded blows with brutal intensity. Lightning-fast kunai volleys, shuriken barrages, even elemental jutsu lit up the darkness. But as the hours wore on, Kumogakure's lines began to falter. Casualties mounted, morale slipped, and exhaustion set in. By the time midnight passed, the tide had unmistakably turned. Commander Nara Fufeng had anticipated precisely this moment. His strategy had always centered on grinding down the enemy until they broke. Now, with Kumogakure's forward units reeling, he gave the order to contract their defenses. Each remaining Cloud Shinobi was told to fall back to holding positions, to deny Konoha any further gains, and to buy precious time. As Kumogakure's fighters ceased their counterattacks, Konoha's army held its breath. The battlefield fell silent, except for the distant clang of collapsing barricades and the moans of the wounded. For Fufeng, and for Nathan, hidden in the shadows beyond the front line, the long night's fighting had paid off. The advantage once seized by Kumogakure in their surprise assault was now completely reversed. All that remained was to secure their ground before dawn broke. Nathan's lips curved into a wry smile the moment he heard the report. He'd known all along that word of the infiltration team's troubles would reach the higher-ups, and with the warlike spirit of Kumogakure, they'd never admit defeat, or leave their own unprotected, unless it was dire. The possibility of the team being wiped out had always been high. Even so, the news suited him. Without the burden of battlefield orders, he could return to his true priority, training, and fully tap into the reserves of chakra he'd stored. Without hesitation, Nathan formed the necessary seals and executed the shadow clone technique. The duplicate of himself, identical in form and chakra, took charge of the camp's defenses, scouting for any threats or messages that might arrive. Once he was assured the camp was in capable hands, Nathan centered his focus, channeled his chakra to his feet, and activated the Flying Thunder God technique. In an instant, he vanished from the Land of Lightning and reappeared on the small island off the southern coast of the Land of Fire, a place he knew intimately. Upon arrival, Nathan slid a fingertip to the center of his brow and carefully loosened the Guardian seal. A second later, his Byakugan whirred to life. The pale outlines of every nearby being, structure, and landform sharpened in his sight. Satisfied that no one was lurking in ambush, he gently deactivated his seal, allowing the tense energy behind it to bleed away. Kneeling on the sandy shore, Nathan gathered his remaining chakra. He formed the signs for the multiple shadow clone technique and expanded 5 clones blossom into existence around him, each an echo of his form and will. Then, without a word, all 6 of them launched into their regimen. A precise series of forms, strikes, and chakra exercises, repeated until muscle memory and spiritual focus became one. Here, on this quiet island, Nathan would hone himself into a force to be reckoned with. Nathan resolved to push his Sharingan's evolution to 40,000 out of 50,000 before Takigakure could mount a counterstrike. Only by reaching that threshold could he unlock the next stage of Susanoo, his ultimate defense, and bolster his spiritual reserves for the looming battle against the Seven Tails. With his mind made up, he moved swiftly. He assigned precise training regimens to his shadow clones, then turned his focus inward, refining his ocular powers in solitude. Morning came almost before he realized it. From the front lines, reports filtered in. The Cloud Village shinobi, still smarting from Konoha's overt provocations, had nonetheless maintained strict discipline. Their initial restlessness had given way to cautious restraint. None dared act rashly, at least not until they discovered why all 3 of their infiltration teams had gone dark. That delay worked in Nathan's favor. While the Cloud Ninjas searched for answers, he enjoyed precious hours to deepen his Sharingan's evolution and strengthen his spiritual chakra. Tomorrow, the real test would begin. But for now, In the quiet dawn, Nathan pressed on with renewed determination. Chapter 702, Promotion Achieved. Dawn turned to dusk in the blink of an eye. Just as Nathan had anticipated, Union Village took the bait, licking its wounds after the recent setback and immediately launching an inquiry into the infiltration operation. To stay one step ahead, Narafufeng ordered Nathan to return to the ghost-crying forest with a small squad, not to ambush Union's investigators this time, but to thwart any covert scouts they might send in. Once he understood his orders, Nathan created a single shadow clone to lead that task force, while he himself remained on the island to continue his training. If trouble erupted deeper in the forest, he had no intention of leaving his operatives to fend for themselves. Each clone he dispatched had been taught to mark strategic spots, a tree trunk, a boulder, even patches of bare earth, with his unique chakra seal. The moment Nathan sensed danger, he could teleport directly to any of those marks using his perfected Flying Thunder God technique. With that guarantee of instant reinforcement, there was no risk of misunderstanding the mission or abandoning his people. As for chakra reserves, Nathan had anticipated that concern long ago. By refining his chakra control and limiting each shadow clone's consumption to only the essentials, he ensured that neither his training nor the operation would ever be cut short for lack of energy. Confident in his preparations, Nathan settled into his rigorous routine, ready to defend his allies and face whatever challenges the ghost-crying forest might still conceal. Nathan had streamlined his skill set to ensure his chakra reserves never dipped below 50%, more than enough to see him through a major confrontation. With his preparations complete, he could finally devote himself wholly to training. That morning, he settled cross-legged on the beach and activated the heart reflection technique. Channeling chakra into his brain and eyes, he felt a familiar surge of energy, and then both Sharingans snapped open, accompanied by a sharp sting and an odd, prickly itch. Nathan recognized the sensation immediately. His Mangekyo Sharingan was on the verge of evolving. Within seconds, the discomfort faded, replaced by a thrilling expansion of his mental power. His senses sharpened to a supernatural degree. He heard the relentless crash of waves against distant reefs, the subtle rustle of his shadow clones shifting behind him, even the excited squawks of tiny worm birds flitting through the palm fronds. Every whisper of sound drilled into his consciousness. Still with his eyes closed, Nathan let the new clarity wash over him. He recalled the rule he'd uncovered. Once his core attributes improved, each subsequent advancement would yield ever greater leaps in power. Now, feeling the first true fruits of that discovery, a confident smile tugged at his lips. A new stage of strength had begun. After nearly an hour, Nathan's eyes fluttered open. Without hesitation, he formed a hand seal and released the multi-shadow clone technique. Instantly, every clone, whether training on the island's shore or diving in the surrounding waters, dissolved into streams of chakra. Each wisp carried back the memories and experiences they had accumulated. Nathan closed his eyes again, focusing inward as that torrent of knowledge and muscle memory washed over him. He meticulously absorbed each sensation, each movement, until the techniques themselves felt like second nature. Finally, when the last currents of chakra had settled, he opened his eyes, his gaze steady, his skills sharpened, and his mastery complete. Nathan blinked as his vision cleared, then whispered, "Interface." In an instant, the familiar pale blue status panel shimmered into view. Name, Uchiha Aomi. Age 13, physical constitution, 22 spirit, 22-23. Chakra 175,600, 299,060, 307,364. Bloodline progress. Sharingan kaleidoscope, 38,256, 50,000, 40,000, 50,000. White flame, Bayan, 1,000, 100, 1,000. Skills. Chakra refinement, level 6, 1,136, 10,000, 2,122, 10. Water Tour. Ent, Grand Hydro Burst, level 7, 10,165, 20,000, 16,350, 20,000. Thunderbolt Rumble, Thunder 1, 65,200. Thunder Aura Chakra Mode, level 2000. Earth Piercing, Great Earth Collapse, level 5, 3,405,000, level 6, 2,610. Multi-Shadow Clone, level 8, 41,000, 950,000, 47,900 per 50,000. Sword Art Shadow Slash. Level 8, 37,430 50,000, 44,780 50,000. Flying Thunder God, Ever 5, 857, 445 20,000. Phantasm, Dark Eclipse, Level 5, 3555,000, and Evorb 6, 2,1000. Nirvana Square Technique, 5, 3,600, 5,000, Level 6, 2,950 4 Elephant Seals. Level 6, 550 10,000, 7,480 10,000. Seal of Self-Discipline. Level 6, 990 10,000, 8,907 10,000. Chakra Scalpel. Level 7, 14,520,000, 16,420,000. Shadow Sword. Level 6, 5,500 per 10,000, 7,100 10,000. Chakra Control. Level 6, 7,850 10,000, 8,000 18. No new skills unlocked. Just as Nathan had hoped, reaching 40,000 out of 50,000 toward his Sharingan's next evolution had finally pushed his spirit attribute up from 22 to 23. Thanks to this change, Nathan's White Eye evolution jumped by nearly 100 points, vaulting from 1,000 to 101,000. He blinked deliberately, tuning into his body. At first, nothing seemed different, but after a moment he realized his chakra expenditure had dropped slightly, and his vision had grown noticeably sharper. The overall improvement was subtle and seamless, no errors, no hitches, and Nathan found himself quietly pleased by the unexpected boost. Refocusing on his spiritual attribute, he felt his latent potential swell once more. Before this breakthrough, his chakra ceiling topped out at 1,150,000 points. Now it had climbed to 1,350,000. A 200,000 point increase might not match the 250,000 jump he'd gained from his last physical upgrade, but it was still a remarkable surge. Nathan had recalibrated his attributes before. When his physique surged, it had naturally brought his spiritual side back into balance. So it made sense that his theoretical chakra ceiling would climb again. This time, though, the spiritual upgrade carried an extra bonus: faster chakra regeneration. To find out just how much faster, Nathan closed his eyes and paused his chakra refining technique, allowing his energy to rebuild on its own. 1 second, 2 seconds, a minute, 2 minutes, 15 minutes slipped by before he opened his eyes and checked the display. In that quarter hour, his chakra had increased by 9,895 points. Extrapolated, that meant roughly 39,580 points per hour, or about 950,000 points in a full day, a gain of 150,000 over his previous 800,000 point limit. It wasn't quite as dramatic as the 160,000 point boost he'd gotten from his last physique breakthrough, but it still outpaced the 110,000 point jump he'd earned when his spiritual attribute climbed from 21 to 22. Nathan allowed himself a small, satisfied grin. Not bad at all. Nathan frowned as he studied his status screen. His spirit attribute hadn't budged, still no increase to his body's chakra pressure tolerance. Whoa, that meant the daily window to use the chakra refiner technique remained exactly the same, so his passive chakra recovery stayed fixed at 150,000 points. Those 150,000 points were all he had to work with today, and figuring out how best to spend them would be his next challenge. He shifted his gaze from the chakra bar to the skills panel. His signature techniques had all improved significantly. The 4 symbols seal and the self-injury curse seal both sat at the peak of level 6, just 1 step away from level 7, and the Flying Thunder God technique had already broken through to level 7, undergoing a qualitative leap that dramatically boosted his mobility. Still, if Nathan wanted a better shot at capturing a tailed beast, he knew he couldn't rest. He had to push those 2 seals even further. Time was running out for Nathan, so it was crucial that he carefully decide how to distribute his chakra. Chapter 703, Allocation, Training, Advancement, and Strategy. Nathan paused to weigh his options. He needed to push his Seal of the Curse of Self-Karma to the next level, and fast. Up until sinking 36,000 chakra points per day into the technique, earning 360 proficiency points daily. But having just perfected Tiulu, the art of beheading in the heart, he freed up an extra 40,000 chakra. Redirecting that surplus to the seal brought his total daily investment to 76,000 chakra and 760 proficiency points. At present, the seal sits at level 6 with 8,970 of 10,000 points. At 760 points a day, Nathan could hit level 7 in about a day and a half. But time was against him. Intel from his shadow clone in Taki Hidden Village warned that the senior council there would be ready to perform the Seven Tails transplant within 3 days. Nathan couldn't afford any last-minute rush. He had to reach level 7 in under 24 hours, leaving himself a cushion for final preparations. With that decision made, Nathan adjusted his chakra allocation plan. Every waking moment from now until the seal advanced would be devoted to pouring in energy and sharpening his mind until the technique broke through to the next stage. Nathan scanned his newly augmented chakra reserves. The recent boost to his spiritual attribute had raised his total to 150,000 points. He resolved to devote 30,000 of them today to refining the self-karma boundary seal. At that rate, he'd push it from level 6 straight to level 7 in a single day. That left him with 120,000 chakra points to pour into the four symbols seal. Previously, he'd only managed to invest 80,000 points per day, earning about 660 proficiency points. With his current progress, 7,480 out of the 10,000 points needed for level 7, it would have taken him over 3 days to advance. But now, by channeling the full 120,000 points, his daily proficiency gain would leap to an unprecedented 1,660 points. In theory, he'd reach level 7 in just a day and a half. If he timed his final chakra infusion right after the self-karma boundary seal leveled up, he could shave even more time off the process. With a confident nod, Nathan sealed his decision. Today's disciplined allocation would accelerate both seals' breakthroughs and bring him another step closer to mastery. By my calculations, I'll be ready in just a day and a half, arriving only an hour or two after the self-karma seal is scheduled to lift. That timing gives me everything I need. Now, all that remains is to hope the Taki Hidden Village doesn't make a move within the next 24 hours. Even if they do, it won't derail me. Every precaution I've taken was meant to cover my tracks and secure the Seven Tails intact, no matter what unfolds on the larger stage. As for danger, what little risk once existed has all but vanished. My Sharingan has reached 40,000 out of 50,000 points, unlocking the threshold for the 4th stage of Susanoo. In this form, Susanoo is the most formidable it can be before reaching its final, complete manifestation. Its offensive power and defenses surge, and it sprouts legs of its own, granting me unparalleled mobility on the battlefield. With that strength at my command, the Seven Tails will be mine. Nathan's power was staggering. Even unleashing a single Seven Tails would barely bother him, let alone the combined forces of the entire Tail Hidden Village. Over years of cultivation, his chakra reserves had swelled past 300,000 points. To put that in perspective, ordinary shinobi without special bloodlines or abilities rarely exceeds 7 or 8,000. A prodigy like Kakashi might push 10,000. Nathan alone could match 30 Kakashis in raw chakra. Granted, he still trailed legends like Naruto Uzumaki, Madara Uchiha, and Hashirama Senju, but with this immense well of energy, he could confidently face any major conflict. On top of that, he'd mastered the Perfect Realm's chakra absorption technique. At the slightest opening, he could siphon an enemy's chakra into his own body, rendering prolonged sieges or attrition warfare utterly ineffective against him. Reassured by these facts, Nathan felt no real concern about the mission ahead. As these thoughts raced through his mind, his eyes flicked to a freshly unlocked entry on his status panel. Thunder Escape Chakra Mode. He filed the new ability away for later study and instead turned his full attention to rigorous solo training. Nathan blinked awake as another dawn broke. He reabsorbed his shadow clone, assimilating its hour of training and every scrap of memory. Just as he'd anticipated, after more than a day of non-stop practice, both his self-karma seal and four symbols seal had climbed to level 7, only to hit a hard ceiling. He'd imagined their upper limits might lie even higher, but it turned out level 7 was as far as they'd go. At this threshold, each seal had reached a state of perfection, undergoing a profound, qualitative transformation. His mastery of the two sealing arts had deepened accordingly. Take the self-karma seal. Nathan could now cast it without having to bind it onto himself. Better still, he could plant it anywhere as an invisible trap, on doorways, windowsills, or even fragments of terrain. The moment an unwitting intruder crossed its boundary, the seal would spring to life. In short, its versatility had expanded enormously. Meanwhile, the four symbols seal had grown stronger and more fluid in his hands. The four guardian energies, azure dragon, vermilion bird, white tiger, and black tortoise, responded to his will with swifter precision, their elemental forces surging at his command. With both seals operating at peak efficiency, Nathan felt an exhilarating surge of confidence. This was only the beginning. Nathan sat back and studied the four symbols seal he had just completed. Every element had to be absolutely perfect. One incantation, one set of inscriptions, 6 carefully arranged strokes, a single invocation, 1 bar of chanting, 1 final reading. This method was far more intricate than the self-karma binding seal he'd learned before, but its power was unmatched. Whereas the earlier curse was built to punish, the four symbols seal excelled at containment. Now, with the technique mastered, Nathan knew he could imprison a tailed beast inside someone else's body, and do so with virtually no risk of failure. Yet despite this achievement, he felt unsatisfied. The four symbols seal was still only a B-rank skill, which meant significant drawbacks. Any host carrying a sealed beast would likely suffer mental disturbances over time. What's more, the seal worked only on living vessels. There was no way to anchor a tailed beast to an inanimate object. Determined to overcome those limitations, Nathan resolved to push the four symbols seal even further. His plan was to fuse it with the gossip seal technique, and perhaps incorporate elements of the guarding seal, the object sealing array, and his own self-karma binding seal. If he could distill them all into a single scroll or tool, he might finally create the definitive artifact for safely sealing tailed beasts. Mastering this approach would make tapping into the tailed beast's chakra virtually effortless. Realizing that, Nathan banished all distractions and set about transforming his perfected four symbols seal into the more advanced 8 trigrams seal. Perhaps it was the very act of refining multiple sealing techniques at once that deepened his insight into their true nature. Or maybe the 8 trigram seal naturally emerged from merging 2 four symbols seals. In any case, it wasn't long before he shattered his previous limit. A soft chime sounded in his mind. Concentrating, Nathan summoned his proficiency panel. Just as he'd predicted, the fully mastered four symbols seal shimmered and reshaped itself into the 8 trigrams seal. Instead of dropping back to level 1, his proficiency surged straight to level 7, 2000. Without a moment's hesitation, he redirected the 106,000 chakra he'd invested in the self-karma curse seal and the 200,000 chakra devoted to the four symbols seal into his new technique, Quay. After several trial runs, Nathan arrived at a precise figure. Each incremental point of proficiency in the 8 trigram seal demanded roughly 150 chakra. Confident in this formula, he prepared to push his new seal and himself farther than ever before. At a rate of 306,000 chakra points per day, Nathan's proficiency was increasing by 2,040 points each 24 hours. At that pace, he would attain level 8 in under 10 days, and then, after a further 25 days, reach level 9, which was essentially the cap of his current training method. With just over a month remaining before the mission to capture the 7 tails, it seemed impossible to bridge the gap in time. But Nathan wasn't discouraged. The only requirement for this operation was mastery of the four symbols seal, a technique well within his grasp. His work on the so-called gagram seal and the suite of chakra enhancement procedures that followed were simply forward-looking preparations to better harness the 7 tails' power. They had nothing to do with the immediate plan, so there was no reason to worry about falling behind schedule. Chapter 704, Action. Since Nathan completed the Seal of Self-Karma mantra and the 4 symbol seal, he'd finally been able to relax. True, the 7 tails hadn't claimed those techniques yet, but in Nathan's mind, they were already his. What surprised him, though, was how inert Taki Hidden Village remained. More than a full day had passed with no sign of their long-promised strike. Without their initiative, the Shadow Clan couldn't pinpoint the Cheetale's hideout, and Nathan found himself stuck, completely on the defensive. Still, at least Union Village had enjoyed a reprieve. No large-scale assaults had come, and even Yun Ren, tasked with investigating the missing squad in the ghost-weeping forest, had stirred up no fresh trouble. That calm meant Nathan could devote himself wholly to training, free from distractions. All he had to do now was follow his plan, methodically refine his new seals, and wait for the shadow clone deep inside Taki Hidden Village to slip back with word of their next move. He didn't entirely trust Taki's restraint. He suspected they were merely biding their time, but their earlier intelligence proved accurate. They would act within a week. Night had fallen, and lanterns glimmered across the training grounds. Nathan drew a long breath, centering his focus. Each breath stoked the coiling power of the self-karma mantra. Each stance traced the pattern of the four-symbol seal. So long as he held his ground, the pendulum would swing back in his favor. And when Taki Hidden Village finally struck, he'd be ready. Nathan was deep in practice inside his camp tent when, without warning, a flash of memory burst into his mind. He froze mid-kata, heart pounding. This wasn't one of his own memories, or those harvested from nearby shadow clones. It was from the covert clones he'd planted inside Taki Hidden Village. Dropping his training sword, he grabbed his notebook and began to sift through the mental images. He filtered out every day-to-day recollection, focusing solely on what had happened today. What he found made his blood run cold. Just an hour ago, Taki Village had declared full martial law. All exits and entries were sealed, patrols doubled, and the village's protective barriers were activated at maximum strength. The local shinobi were thrown into chaos, so baffled that anyone who tried to slip outside for answers was turned back at the gates. Most of the villagers had no idea what this sudden lockdown meant, but Nathan's shadow clone, embedded deeply within the village hierarchy, had pieced it together. Taki hadn't faced an external threat in years. The only plausible explanation for such drastic measures was the council's covert plan. They were preparing to extract and transplant the Seven-Tails beast. If successful, they'd weaponize its power, creating a so-called nuclear weapon capable of reshaping the entire ninja world, just as feared whispers of Manchuri had foretold. Nathan's gaze hardened. If the village succeeded, the balance of power would shatter. He closed his notebook, sheathed his sword, and stepped out of the tent. There would be no time to lose. Nathan waited for the perfect moment, when no one else was watching, then dispelled the Shadow Clan technique and transmitted all of the clone's memories back to himself. As soon as the last echoes of that jutsu faded, he opened his eyes. Without a second's hesitation, he shoved his gear into a pack, slipped on the prepared mask, and built up thousands of chakra in an instant. With a blur of motion, he activated the Flying Thunder God technique and reappeared in the dense wood just beyond Taki Hidden Village. He hadn't dared teleport the shadow clone directly into the village. It would have left a chakra signature loud enough to alert the serpent. The Shadow Clan's abrupt disappearance might already have set off alarms in Taki. If an unknown shinobi suddenly materialized inside their walls, they'd surely cancel his mission and hunt him down. Better to take the extra risk now than see all his plans unravel. And as for all the patrols swarming Taki, Hei wouldn't suspect a thing. Yuichi Mizutani, who posed as an Uchinobu, was one in blood and bone. With Yuichi's status, a lone shinobi slipping in under that guise would draw no more scrutiny than any passing messenger. Nathan advanced through the undergrowth, his heart steady. The real infiltration was about to begin. Nathan didn't have official clearance to enter Taki Hidden Village, but it was a small shinobi settlement with minimal defenses. A mission of this scale demanded elite operatives, disciplined, alert, and ready for anything. Mizutani Yuichi's assignment was to guard the perimeter, keeping watch for any pursuers or infiltrators. Seizing the perfect moment, Nathan slipped away undetected and disabled the village's Shadow Clan alert system. He knew someone might already have noticed his absence, so caution was paramount. Thoughts racing, Nathan reviewed his plan. He formed a quick succession of hand seals, then activated 2 jutsu at once, the Gale Wings technique and the chakra feather cloak. In an instant, he was aloft, cutting through the night sky toward Taki Hidden Village. The surrounding forest lay only a short distance away. What would take an hour by foot with the ninja run was reduced to mere minutes by flight. Soon, the great waterfall veiling the ridge to the village came into view. Even under the moonlight, its thunderous cascade was undeniably majestic. But Nathan had no time to admire the spectacle. This mission left no room for distraction. He steadied himself for the next phase, infiltrating the hidden enclave and uncovering its secrets before anyone could stop him. Nathan hovered silently under the cover of night, chakra rippling beneath his cloak. He raised his hand, forming a precise seal as he released the subtle, guarding mark hidden at the center of his brow. Concentrating, he opened his left eye, and in that instant, his vision tore through the darkness, the forehead protector, even the mask of a nearby Konoha shinobi. Within a 1-kilometer radius, he discerned dozens of Taki ninja deployed in a loose ring, their every movement betraying a determination to shield the hidden waterfall village at its heart. From this height, Nathan remained invisible, yet he knew that any descent would invite discovery. Better, he decided, to close the distance in the blink of an eye. He activated his Mangekyo Sharingan, the patterns in his left pupil spiraling into life. Without hesitation, he unleashed his space-time technique, Tianjiyu. His form dissolved into a swirl of distortion, and a heartbeat later, he reappeared at the edge of the great waterfall that concealed the village entrance. The cascading water parted around him as though acknowledging his passage. Stepping forward with unwavering confidence, Nathan passed through the veil of liquid mist and into the hidden waterfall village itself. Nathan moved through each checkpoint in turn until he slipped inside Taki Hidden Village. Finding a secluded corner out of sight, he activated his direction of heaven. Beneath his mask, a single bloody tear welled from his left eye, evoking a sense of awe even in the quiet shadows. He pressed his palm to his temple and shut the injured eye. A sharp sting flickered behind his lids. He knew he'd overstrained it. According to his Sharingan's evolution meter, he was at 40,550 out of a possible 50,000. At this level, he could only maintain the technique for 50 seconds at most. Although his infiltration had been swift, the labyrinthine entry passage and vigilant guards had forced him to remain hidden far longer than he'd intended. Over 40 seconds had passed, nearly the limit, and his eye felt the burn. Still, Nathan's extraordinary constitution and formidable endurance bore the burden. An ordinary shinobi would have suffered irreversible damage by now. Yet his vision remained clear and sharp, unfazed by the immense pressure he'd just endured. Carefully, he deactivated the direction of heaven, his breathing steadying as he prepared to press deeper into the village. Even so, Nathan knew he couldn't afford to relax. According to his calculations, it would take nearly 2 more months for his Mangekyo Sharingan to amass the final 50,000 points and evolve into the eternal Mangekyo Sharingan, finally freeing him from the ever-present risk of blindness. 2 months. Nothing could go wrong before then. He shoved the thought aside, allowing himself a brief rest until his eyes cleared. Once his vision steadied, he moved at once to where his shadow clone waited by the barrier. Beyond lay the sealed zone of the seven-tailed beast, the perfect place to gather vital information. This time, Nathan resolved not to unleash his Tianmo technique. He slipped inside the perimeter under the cover of shadows, certain that without his trademark power, the barrier's sentries would be less alert. He'd blend in, adopt a fresh disguise, stroll through the village, and resort only to his heavenly emperor ability to neutralize any patrolling guards he couldn't bypass. By relying on subterfuge instead of raw power, he'd keep the pressure off himself and ensure nothing untoward happened in the next 2 months. Chapter 705, Finding an Opportunity. Is this it? Deep in the mist-shrouded outskirts of the hidden village of Taki, a lone figure materialized. It was Nathan's shadow clone, perfectly assuming the guise of Yuichi Mizutani. Pressing himself against a moss-covered boulder, the clone murmured as he studied the heavily guarded cave entrance before him. According to Nathan's latest reconnaissance, this cavern was almost certainly where the Seven Tails was being held. If the Taki Hidden Village planned to transplant that beast's chakra into a human, and thus create a human Jubi, They'd need a remote, formidable stronghold like this. After all, escorting a tailed beast posed a far greater logistical nightmare and risk than smuggling an infant. The clone remained silent, watching the guards' patrols, yet no signage or seals betrayed the cave's true contents. Nathan's clone then concentrated his chakra, activating a specialized vision that allowed him to peer through solid rock. In an instant, his eyes revealed the cavern's interior. What he saw shook him. A vast wellspring of chakra pulsed at the heart of the cave, its energy so dense it seemed corrosive, pressing upon his mind like a physical weight. Most shinobi would have felt their spirits waver under such an onslaught, but Nathan's spiritual fortitude, bolstered by his exceptional 23 points in the spiritual attribute, held firm. He stood unmoved, meticulously examining every detail the vision granted him. This place was indeed the key. And now that Nathan knew the true extent of Taki's plans, he would seize whatever opportunity presented itself to strike. With the residual distortion dispelled, Nathan at last turned his full attention to the chakra's source. Towering before him was a colossal creature, part insect, part moth. Its vast, patterned wings spread wide, and from its rear sprouted 7 forked tails, undeniable proof that this was Chongming, the 7 tails sealed beneath Taki village. The moment Nathan felt that chakra signature, he was certain of its identity. He had encountered tailed beasts more than once. He'd even employed the chakra absorption technique to draw in 6 different beasts at close range, and each had left a distinct impression on his senses. There was no doubt in his mind now, and he refused to question his judgment. Nathan narrowed his gaze, channeling chakra into his perception and studying Chongming's condition. Countless sealing talismans and barriers coiled tightly around the beast's massive form, clear evidence of Taki village's constant vigilance. Even in slumber, Chongming remained bound by those seals, its tremendous power locked away by ancient jutsu. Only this could explain why no one in Takihiro village had ever heard so much as a whisper. It also confirmed that the hidden village of Taki truly excelled at sealing techniques. Nathan wondered if they'd managed to get their hands on Uzumaki clan relics. After all, the Uzumaki were renowned as the greatest sealing masters in the ninja world. Anyone capable of perfectly containing a tailed beast would owe it to their arts. The thought kindled a spark of excitement in Nathan's chest, but he forced it down. His mission here was to capture the tailed beasts, not to collect ancient sealing secrets. He pushed the distraction aside and refocused on his goal. Now that he knew where the beast lay hidden, what was his next move? Strike immediately or wait for a better opportunity? As he weighed his options, the tailed beast that had been watching him with half-closed eyes suddenly snapped them wide open. That single deadly gaze, was it indifferent, dominating, or filled with hatred? Nathan couldn't tell. Nathan's blood ran cold as the creature's compound eyes suddenly snapped open. He'd been sure it was still asleep, but now it was plain he'd been mistaken. Or perhaps not. He shifted his gaze to the figures gathered around the 7 tails. Deep within the cavern, half a dozen waterfall shinobi knelt on the stone floor, their forearms pressed against the ground as they meticulously traced the sealing array. The jutsu consisted of 2 interlocking rings. The larger circle enveloped the coils of the tailed beast itself, while the smaller ring surrounded a swaddled infant. The baby lay on a simple blanket, thumb in mouth, his dark eyes moving as if he understood every flicker of firelight. This child, named Fu, was only a few months old, yet he was destined to become the next Jinchuriki of the 7 tails, Chomei. The shinobi were in the final stages of binding the beast's power to him. No wonder Chomei had awakened. Though tailed beasts are often dismissed as mere monsters, they possess far greater intelligence than most give them credit for. Faced with the threat of being forcibly sealed into a human vessel, they instinctively resist. Nathan pressed his back against the damp cave wall. If these waterfall shinobi completed the jutsu, they would bind one of the world's greatest powers to an infant, and unleash untold danger once that seal inevitably broke. He had to act, and fast, before the final chant was uttered. Nathan reflected on the tailed beast's true nature. They're effectively immortal, able to reform their bodies years after apparent destruction. Yet no sentient being, no matter how powerful, can accept total annihilation without a shred of hope. When free of a human host, a beast can rely on its own immense longevity and strength to slip away. But once it's sealed into a Jinchuriki's body, its fate is irrevocably linked to that of its vessel. If the host dies, the beast dies too. Any being with an ounce of self-preservation instinct would resist such absolute control, so it was hardly surprising the creature would eventually awaken. What Nathan had failed to anticipate was that it was his own intrusion, peering into the beast's chakra with his Sharingan, that roused it from deep slumber. Tailed beasts, heirs to ancient powers, are far more sensitive to ocular jutsu like the Sharingan or Rinnegan than ordinary shinobi. They perceive and understand these formidable abilities instinctively, and they react to them. In the end, Nathan could only admit that he had gravely underestimated the beast's awareness, and paid the price for his overconfidence. Nathan's thoughts were still racing when one of the Taki ninja, busy drawing the sealing talismans in the air, suddenly stiffened. The seven-tailed chakra was surging, undeniably awake. Alarm flashed across the ninjas' faces as they sketched the seal around the beast once more. The familiar wards flared, and the creature's eyes fluttered shut as it was driven back into slumber. But this time, Chitai refused to surrender so easily. Unbound by any seal within Hokiriku's body, it didn't fully understand the Taki clan's methods, but its instincts screamed danger. And there was something more. An unknown adversary waited outside. Nathan. Though the beast had never seen him, Chitai's keen perception had detected a hidden, ruthless greed in Nathan's gaze. That alone was enough to keep it from drifting back to sleep. Against all the seals, the simplest and most savage option was clear: resist. Suddenly the air shuddered with a metallic clatter, as if chains had come to life, an ominous hint that Chitai's defiance had only just begun. Chains of chakra flared to life around the seven tails as several Waterfall Village shinobi wove their sealing jutsu. The ethereal chains snaked over the beast's fur, pinning its limbs, but the tailed monster's furious thrashing rattled the bonds, and it seemed only a matter of time before the seal gave way. Outside the cavern, an Ambu operative on patrol sensed the disturbance. He split his squad in two. One half stormed the main entrance, the other slipped through a side tunnel. Not long after, a detachment of elite ninja from the village joined the assault, closing in on the sealing chamber. Within, the assembled shinobi exchanged worried glances. Elder Takahiro, the senior commander, strode forward, his brow furrowed. "Explain yourselves. Why has the Seven Tails awakened? We reinforced its seal only recently." Nathan, the officer, appointed to oversee the containment, stepped up. He shook his head. "I'm afraid we don't know, Elder. It stirred without warning. All we can do now is keep it restrained." Elder Takihiro's gaze hardened as he turned to a nearby Anbu captain. "We cannot risk its escape. Immediately dispatch teams to search every tunnel and ridge around this cave. No one gets in or out without authorization." "Yes, Elder." The captain saluted crisply before sprinting off to issue the orders. In moments, the seals glowed brighter, and the perimeter rang with the sounds of ninja boots as the village's most capable operatives fanned out into the darkness. Nathan slipped out of the sealing chamber with his flash body technique. Senior Takian's senses were razor-sharp. He instantly suspected an outside assault. But that very suspicion opened the door Nathan needed. He watched as the Takahiro Ambu guards were scattered and disoriented. A subtle smile curved beneath Nathan's mask. Then, as silently as a shadow, he tailed one of the bewildered sentries. Chapter 706, Infiltration. Nathan trailed the Taki village Anbu operative through one narrow cavern after another, eventually arriving at a chamber not far from the sealing room. It was the same route he'd scouted on his initial infiltration, proof of just how labyrinthine Taki village's mountain hideout truly was. There were no open courtyards here, only an endless network of tunnels and caves. Such terrain let the defenders funnel intruders into choke points and methodically sweep each section, Ambu team by Ambu team. As the patrol swept past him, Nathan lay in wait. Then, in a heartbeat, he struck. He activated his Mangekyo Sharingan and unleashed the left-eye dojutsu, known as the Heavenly Path. His form flickered out of view, only to reappear directly behind the unsuspecting operative. With lightning speed, he closed the final few feet, chakra flaring as he braced his palm for the knockout blow. When the Anbu soldier whirled around, it was already too late. Nathan's attack landed with precise force, catching him completely off guard. Nathan's arrival in the corridor was like a beacon cutting through the darkness, far too conspicuous to go unnoticed. No sooner had he stepped into view than Takahiro of the Anbu leaped forward, closing the distance in a heartbeat. As he advanced, Takahiro withdrew several kunai, spinning on the balls of his feet before launching them straight at Nathan. The motion was so smooth and swift it might have gone unseen, if not for Nathan's Sharingan. In an instant, those crimson eyes had tracked the blade's flight path and even detected the tiny detonation talismans lashed to their handles. It was obvious Takahiro didn't intend to kill him. He was after a loud distraction, a blast that would summon backup. But Nathan couldn't afford any disruptions. He still had to slip into the sealing chamber under a false identity, and any commotion now would ruin his entire plan. As the kunai whistled through the air, Nathan fully unleashed his Sharingan's power. He met Takehiro's gaze, weaving a genjutsu with the faintest twist of his vision. In that instant, Takahiro, well aware of the Sharingan's fearsome reputation, found himself paralyzed by an illusion he couldn't escape. The kunai clattered to the floor, harmless, as the corridor fell eerily silent once more. Nathan caught a glimpse of the swirling illusion at the edge of his vision and braced himself, shutting his eyes to resist. But it was too late. The masked shinobi anticipated him. In an instant, Nathan's world tilted into the enemy's dreamscape. When his sight snapped back, the Anbu operative stood frozen. Nathan flickered forward, disarming him in a single motion. The kunai clattered free of the ninja's hand, its detonation talisman still intact. Nathan tucked the untriggered seal into a hidden pocket, relief washing over him. He gripped the operative by the shoulders, tilted his head back, and peeled off the mask. Beneath it was a young man, barely in his 20s. Nathan's fingertips glowed faintly as he sifted through the youth's memories. There wasn't time to catalog every detail, only the essentials. His code name, signature techniques, mission parameters. Moments later, Nathan released him, meeting his wide, unguarded eyes. He whispered the name he'd just learned, Black Snake. Nathan's palm blurred into a razor-sharp chakra scalpel. In one clean stroke, he sliced through Takahiro Anbu's throat. A strangled gasp escaped Anbu as the illusionary black snake shattered, and for a moment he tried to summon the strength to warn his village, his lips forming a hoarse ho-ho-ho, even as life drained away. But Nathan was already one step ahead. The instant Anbu struggled, Nathan reclaimed his chakra scalpel and severed the meridians and muscle fibers in the man's right arm, rendering it useless high in the air. Without missing a beat, he swept the blade across Anbu's chest, severing the heart's muscle tissue in a grim final cut. The black snake's remnants fizzled out, and Anbu fell, utterly still. Nathan didn't linger. He dragged the body into a shadowed corner and hid it from view. Then, calling upon his transformation technique, he morphed flawlessly into Takahiro Anbu's likeness. Though part of him considered eradicating the corpse entirely, the barrier's confines and his own disciplined reserve held him back from using any overt ninjutsu. Standing motionless in his new guise, Nathan prepared himself for the next phase of his mission. Nathan paused at the edge of the corridor and surveyed the ritual chamber ahead. Nothing about this situation posed an insurmountable problem. As long as the body remained undiscovered, he could manage whatever came next. According to his plan, once he stepped inside the sealing room, success would follow swiftly. He would cloak himself with the Heavenly Lord's power, then unleash the Flying Thunder God technique to vanish from sight. Even if the corpse were later found in the hidden village of Taki, it wouldn't matter. Confident in his strategy, Nathan took a deep breath and advanced toward the heavy bronze doors. Inside, the sealing ritual still pressed on, indeed, had to press on, because the nine-tailed beast bound within was growing more formidable by the moment. In the early stages, the creature had been sluggish, perhaps lulled by the chamber's unbroken silence and solitude. But now, sensing imminent containment, it thrashed and roared, its power surging against the wards. Each wave of fury made the seal ever harder to maintain. Nathan steeled himself. The ritual's tempo faltered under the beast's onslaught, but he would not fail. As he crossed the threshold, every ounce of his will focused on reinforcing the seal, even as he prepared for the split-second strike that would hide him from sight and send him fleeing on storm-lit clouds. Success hinged on perfect timing, and he had no intention of letting the ritual, or the nine-tailed monster, get the better of him. Meanwhile, a hidden threat loomed over their operation. What if their adversaries tried the human Choli transplant experiment again? And rumors of enemies lurking in the shadows only added to the pressure. After weighing the risks, Elder Takahiro resolved to proceed exactly as planned. Only by completing the ritual could they shut the door on this danger once and for all. Still, he took no chances. He summoned extra guards and added several new security checkpoints along the corridor leading to the sealing chamber. Unfortunately for him, nothing could stop Nathan from slipping through. Using his Black Snake alias, Nathan breezed past every guard station and swept through the checkpoints without alerting anyone. Just as the Taki ninja was about to seal the Seven Tails' power into Fu's body, Nathan stepped into the antechamber outside the sealing room. Elder Takian looked up in surprise at the Black Snake's sudden appearance. "What's wrong, Black Snake?" he asked, noting Nathan's tense expression. Nathan didn't pause. "Great, Elder. We've encountered a serious issue outside." Elder Takian nodded, his voice calm and steady. "What sort of issue?" Nathan hesitated for just a heartbeat, measuring his words carefully before revealing what he'd discovered. "Wait." Elder Takian's sharp command cut through the night, his gaze locking onto Nathan. But Nathan pressed on, as though he hadn't heard, even quickening his stride. Alarmed, the other Takahiro Anbu sprang into action. They hurled shuriken in Nathan's direction and leapt forward, aiming to intercept him before he could reach their comrade. Their reflexes were swift, but not swift enough. In a single blur of movement, Nathan closed the distance and materialized directly in front of the stunned Taki ninja. The moonlight caught on his determined eyes as he prepared for what would come next. Chapter 707, A Snatched Strike and a Swift Blade. The Takigakure shinobi before them was none other than Hayakawa Yato, a special jonin of the village's elite sealing squad. His task was to oversee the critical sealing ritual, and Aomine had marked him as the key to throwing everything into disarray. In an instant, steel flashed. Aomine swept his right arm forward, drawing a kunai from the fold of his sleeve so smoothly it seemed to materialize in his palm. Before Yato could react, the blade was already cutting toward his throat with lightning speed. Though the Takigakure elder had cried a warning, Yato hesitated for just a heartbeat, fatal for a warrior more accustomed to scrolls and seals than hand-to-hand combat. The kunai slashed deep, tearing through cloth and flesh. Gah! A crushing wave of pain and panic overtook Yato. He stumbled back, clutching his neck as blood welled beneath his fingers. Disbelief glazed his eyes. He could scarcely believe something so simple had brought him to his knees. In the eyes of his village, a jonin with his sealing mastery was nothing short of a treasure, and now he lay wounded, the sealing rite left brutally exposed. In the past, whenever Nathan ventured beyond the village walls, he was never alone. Anbu operatives always shadowed his steps, shielding him from harm. He'd never had to worry about his own safety. But today, Nathan stared at the two figures who'd arrived too late, the Anbu agent and Aomi, whose eyes betrayed nothing but cold indifference. A pang of regret struck him hard. He had entrusted his life entirely to others, never pausing to strengthen himself. If he'd known this would be his last mission, he would have devoted every spare moment to cultivation. In the ninja world, sealing techniques and other jutsu were only support. True power sprang from one's own skill. Nathan understood that truth only now, at the edge of death, and it was far too late to change anything. Bang! A muted crack echoed in the clearing, and Nathan's body went limp, collapsing to the ground. Though it felt like an eternity, the blow had landed in an instant. The elder of Takigakure, who'd been overseeing the operation, snapped to attention the moment Nathan hit the earth. "Nathan!" the elder roared, panic and fury mixing in his voice. "Damn it! Kill him!" he snarled, turning his glare on Aomine with unmistakable killing intent. Yet the order was hardly necessary. At the elder's shout, the Takigakure Anbu had already sprang into action, blades drawn and chakra flaring, ready to finish the mission. Despite being Takigakure's finest, the shinobi were no match for Aomine. He didn't even need to activate his Sharingan. relying instead on his heightened perception from 23 points in the spirit attribute. He effortlessly slipped past their opening encirclement. Seizing the moment, Aomine formed the 5 hand seals of snake, goat, monkey, boar, and tiger, then unleashed a deceptively simple technique, Earth-style, Earth Dragon Spear. Though ranked C-class, in a confined space like this cavern, it struck with the force of a B-rank jutsu, if not greater. Planting one palm against the rocky floor, Aomine poured vast reserves of earth chakra into the ground, tapping into hidden ley lines and forcing thousands of jagged stone spikes to erupt. Under his precise control, the spikes lunged forward like a writhing dragon, pinning every Takigakure ninja on the cavern floor to a panicked retreat. In seconds, Aomine had cleared a wide swath around the Seven Tails, leaving his enemies scrambling for cover. Seizing the opening, Aomine slid in beside the Seven Tails, ready to strike. But the Takigakure shinobi weren't naive. At the first sign of him moving toward the tailed beast, they guessed his intent and unleashed a fierce counterattack. Kunai whistled through the air, ninjutsu flared, and several warriors even rammed the barrier of Earth-style, Earth Dragon Spear, determined either to kill him or at least pin him in place. Aomine's lips curled beneath his mask. He had no intention of engaging them head-on. Usting his keen perception and extraordinary agility, he weaved through their assault, dodging razor-sharp blades and bursts of chakra with effortless grace. As the shinobi scrambled to regroup, Aomine slipped closer to the Seven Tails, hand already forming the seals for his self-inflicted curse-binding technique. In that instant, the Seven Tails seemed to sense the danger. Its massive form trembled, then it unleashed a raw, indiscriminate blast of chakra that slammed Aomine and the Takigakure ninjas alike. The force shattered the remaining ceiling restraints and sent everyone sprawling. In the echoing aftermath, the cavern rumbled with the beast's wrath, unleashed and unbound. Moments ago, the Takigakure shinobi assigned to restrain the beast had been driven back yet again, allowing the Seven Tails to extend its reach even further. Nathan watched as the monstrous creature beat its enormous wings, stirring gale-force winds that whipped through the cavern and kicked up clouds of its powdery scales. A blast of wind alone was manageable. Whether it was Aomine or the Takigakure ninjas, anyone could stabilize themselves by concentrating chakra into their feet. But the scale dust was another matter entirely. It not only blurred vision and scrambled perceptions, it carried a potent toxin. A single inhaled breath or a grain embedded on the skin could paralyze a shinobi in seconds. This was the true danger of a tailed beast. Given even the slightest opening, it could inflict catastrophic casualties. No wonder they were feared as living disasters. Thoughts racing, Nathan braced himself on the jagged cave floor. He drew in a steadying breath, centered his mind, and activated the Byakugan. Instantly, the powder that had blurred his sight dispersed before his enhanced vision, and the chakra signatures of friend and foe alike snapped into focus like glowing beacons in the dim cavern. With his perception restored, Nathan prepared to strike back. Aomine's form blurred as he slipped past the coordinated strikes of the Takigakure Anbu. They'd come prepared, scattering the Seven Tails of the scale powder, poison meant to slow any pursuer. But Aomine's unparalleled physical prowess shrugged off the toxin. Not quite immunity, but enough to stay one step ahead. He didn't counterattack. His mission wasn't to wreak havoc on Takigakure village, but to secure the Seven Tails itself. Through his Byakugan, he spotted raw fear flickering in the creature's compound eyes. A thin smile tugged at his lips. Seizing the perfect moment, he formed the seals and unleashed the self-inflicted curse binding seal before the beast could react again. In an instant, inky black sigils erupted across the Seven Tails' hide, weaving themselves into a cage of shadow that held the beast completely motionless. The creature thrashed and roared, but every furious movement only drew more chakra from Aomine. Across the cavern, a handful of Takigakure's sealing specialists, now recovered from their earlier wounds, hurried forward. They crouched over a giant sealing circle etched into the stone floor, ready to bind both Aomine and the captive beast at once. But before the circle could glow, Aomine's Mangekyo Sharingan flared. He tapped his left eye in a practiced gesture, and in the blink that followed, he and the Seven Tails simply vanished. The sealing squad froze, brushstrokes of power still half complete, as the cavern fell eerily silent. A dozen heartbeats passed before one stunned ninja whispered, How did they disappear?" His voice broke the hush like a stone skidding across water. Pandemonium erupted. Some shinobi scoured the cave walls for any trace of their quarry. Others exchanged frantic theories about the technique they just witnessed, and still more clamored for messengers to sprint back and alert the village. In moments, the once orderly cavern had descended into chaos. Elder Yorinobu's frown deepened as he raised a hand and barked, "Silence!" Instantly, the Takigakure shinobi fell silent. Yorinobu scanned their faces, then spoke in a low, measured tone. "Our target wields the power of the Seven Tails. It's impossible they've gone far. We've sealed the village from every approach. They must still be inside, most likely hiding somewhere around this cave. Split into search parties and root them out." "Understood, Great Elder," the ninjas replied in unison, their voices echoing off the cavern walls. Just as the first squads moved to take up positions, a sweat-soaked messenger burst through the entrance, stumbling to a halt before Yorinobu. The assembled shinobi stiffened. Something in the young man's wild eyes confirmed their worst fears. Gasping for breath, the messenger managed only, "There, gone." A heavy silence fell over the chamber. Yorinobu's heart pounded. "Explain," he demanded. The messenger's voice trembled as he forced out the words. "The Seven Tails host slipped past our guard. We lost sight of him deeper in the cave. Now there's no trace." A murmur of alarm rippled through the ranks. Yorinobu clenched his fists. If the Jinchuriki had escaped their blockade, it meant only one thing. They were facing an enemy more cunning than any of them had anticipated. He swept his gaze across his warriors. "Then our search just became a rescue mission," he said grimly. "We cannot let him slip away into the wild. Move out and leave no stone unturned." With renewed urgency, the Takigakure ninjas surged forward into the twisting tunnels, determined to track down the elusive host of the Seven Tails before it vanished forever. "Great Elder, we have a serious problem. The seven-tailed beast has been sealed inside Shibuki." At the name Shibuki, the Great Elder of Takigakure froze. Shibuki, the late village chief's only son, is not yet 15. Despite his youth, his extraordinary talent, and his father's legacy earned him a rare spot on this mission as a chunin. He was stationed at Defense Sector B2, positioned neither too close nor too far from the sealing chamber. But why was the Great Elder momentarily distracted by the boy's pedigree? Because no matter who Shibuki was, the real crisis lay elsewhere. How had the Seven Tails ended up within him? Pushing aside his surprise, the Great Elder's voice sharpened. "Explain exactly what happened." The reporting ninja bowed low. "Yes, Great Elder. I'll recount everything I witnessed." And then, the scene shifts back 1 minute. End of excerpt. Nathan barely had time to steady himself before activating his special ability, Ame no Minaka. In an instant, he and the Seven Tails vanished from the sealing chamber's confines and reappeared in another dimension, far beyond the reach of the ground barrier that would have held the beast in place, even unattended. Securing the tailed beast at his side, Nathan strode confidently out of the chamber. He made his way through several Class A defense zones, each guarded by alert but middling shinobi, until he reached Sector B2, where Shibuki was stationed. By then, the time limit on Ame no Minaka was nearly up. With a single thought, Nathan released the technique and dropped back into the real world. The Takigakure ninjas around him barely had time to register his reappearance. Seizing the moment, Nathan unleashed the perfect Level 4 symbol's seal. Circles of crackling chakra formed beneath his feet and spiraled upward, binding the Seven Tails instantly into Shibuki's body. Why Shibuki? Nathan could only smile wryly. Some things, he decided, were better left to chance. Nathan swept his gaze over the Takigakure ninjas arrayed before him. The closest was Shibuki, a dependable chunin, steady and predictable, and so Nathan simply reached out and grabbed him. What he didn't realize was how that offhand move would irrevocably alter Takigakure's future. In another timeline, Shibuki would rise to become the village's youngest Mizukage. But now, after being seized by an enemy, even his survival is in doubt. Suppose Nathan, out of mercy, spares Shibuki's life when he transplants the Seven Tails and later returns him to Takigakure. No matter how merciful the gesture, the village elders would never accept a former captive, once an enemy's hostage, as their leader. The only exception in history was Gaara, and that was due to an extraordinary convergence of events. Shibuki's path to power is effectively erased. Unwittingly, Nathan has rewritten Takigakure's destiny, the very plot he relies on. Of course, he never knew Shibuki's true significance at the moment he grabbed him. Even if he had, Nathan wouldn't have hesitated. After all, in the past he depended on preserving the original timeline to reap the advantages of his precognitive gift. This time, though, fate itself has taken a different turn. Nathan's power had grown so much that he no longer fussed over the finer points of fate and intrigue. Had he cared, he never would have cut down Danzo so swiftly. You must understand, Danzo wasn't just another rogue ninja. He was Konoha's eternal scapegoat and a linchpin in the Shinobi world's grand narrative. He'd even had a hand in the Uchiha massacre, one of the most pivotal tragedies in recent history. Yet Nathan slew him without a second thought, or a single word. That one decisive act has already reshaped Konoha's destiny. And because Konoha is one of the 5 great shinobi villages, every tremor in its foundation sends ripples across the entire ninja world. Before long, no one will remember the old future Nathan once knew. No wonder he stopped worrying about everyone else's plots. But that's a tangent. Back to the matter at hand. Having successfully sealed the 7-tail S into Shibuki's body, Nathan chose not to linger and fight the remaining shinobi of Takigakure. He scooped Shibuki up in his arms, activated the Flying Thunder God technique, and in an instant they vanished, reappearing far beyond the borders of the village, hidden by the waterfall. Previously, at levels 5 and 6, he still needed a moment of preparation to launch his technique. But ever since he reached level 7 and underwent that qualitative breakthrough, he could activate it almost instantaneously. At this point, Nathan's mastery of the Flying Thunder God technique had only one real drawback. He couldn't yet employ it with perfect finesse in drawn-out, high-intensity battles. Aside from that, even the combined forces of Takigakure's shinobi were powerless to stop him. The scene shifts back to the present. On the outskirts of Takigakure village, within a dense stand of cedar and pine, 2 silhouettes appeared out of thin air. One was Nathan, the other was Shibuki. Remarkably, despite being under 15 and freshly burdened with a tailed beast sealed inside him, Shibuki showed no sign of panic. He dropped lightly onto a low-hanging branch and took in his surroundings, the moss-covered rocks, the twisting forest path, the familiar flora clinging to the valley walls. All of it confirmed he had barely left the village's borders. He even noted, with a quiet spark of curiosity, the precise method Nathan must have used to teleport them here. Shibuki turned his sharp gaze on Nathan, whose dark ambu mask and cloak still disguised his identity. In a calm, controlled voice, he asked, "Who are you really?" "Where did you learn Konoha's Flying Thunder God technique?" Nathan tilted his head, a faint smile playing on his lips. "Oh, you recognize it?" Shibuki's expression darkened instantly. He'd hoped to catch Nathan off guard, never imagined the man would admit it so readily. A surge of frustration flared in Shibuki's chest. If Nathan was wrong, at least there'd be relief. But this answer posed more questions than it solved. After all, the Flying Thunder God technique was Konoha's closely guarded secret. Officially, only the 4th Hokage, Namikaze Minato, had mastered it. Minato wouldn't dare ambush them in secret, or steal their village's tailed beast, unless he had orders. So if this really was the genuine article, Nathan must have powerful ties to Konoha. What mission could the Hidden Leaf have entrusted him with? Or perhaps Nathan was bluffing, claiming the technique to throw Shibuki off balance. Shibuki's mind raced. Was Nathan secretly acting on behalf of Konoha, or simply shifting the blame with a lie? For the briefest moment, uncertainty gripped him. Nathan let out an almost imperceptible sigh as Shibuki's wild guesses faltered. With a soft surge of chakra, he dispelled his transformation technique and peeled off the mask, his true features coming into view. "Uchiha Nathan?" Shibuki's voice cracked with surprise. For the first time, he recognized the legendary shinobi standing before him. "Is Konoha planning another Ninja World War?" Nathan let out a low, amused chuckle. He waved a hand dismissively. "Konoha is one thing. I'm another. I have no interest in igniting a conflict." Shibuki realized how hopelessly outmatched he was. Though Nathan had released him, the restrained tension around them made any escape or any fight unthinkable. Instead, he leaned forward, eyes gleaming with curiosity. Then what do you want? To become a Jinchuriki? As the question left his lips, Shibuki couldn't help but sense the immense, undulating chakra of the seven-tailed beast coursing through Nathan's body, an awe-inspiring power that raised more questions than answers. Chapter 709, Summary and Return. Become a Jinchuriki? Heh! Nathan chuckled softly, his lips curling into a smirk. He didn't bother responding directly. The disdain written across his features spoke volumes. Isn't that right? Shibuku murmured tentatively, as if expecting agreement. But Nathan cut him off mid-sentence. No more bargaining, he said coldly. The deal's off. From now on, you're just a tool. With that, Nathan snapped his right hand forward as if closing a trap. Shibuku's eyes widened in alarm. He'd never backed down from Nathan before, but now, tagged a tool, whatever that meant, he sensed real danger. Instinct kicked in. He lunged back 2 steps to put distance between them. He wasn't strong enough to overpower Nathan, and running seemed equally hopeless. Still, he dared to resist. The very label tool chilled him to the bone. He refused to become someone else's puppet. As he hesitated, a sliver of hope flickered in his mind. He'd already studied the terrain, rocky outcrops, sparse pines, the gentle curve of the valley floor. This had to be just outside Takian village. If he could hold Nathan off long enough, he might reach the village boundary and slip away in the confusion. Steadying himself, Shibuku squared his shoulders and prepared to face whatever came next. The fate of their bargain, and perhaps much more, would be decided in the moments to follow. To ensure the sealing ritual went off without a hitch, the village had stationed guards in a tight perimeter around the clearing. Any disturbance would draw them in immediately, Nathan's only sliver of hope for survival. Driving Shibuku to take this risk was the torrent of tailed beast chakra flooding his body. Though it constantly gnawed at his will, pushing his mind to the brink, its raw power was undeniable, and he planned to use it against Nathan. But reality shattered his plan almost before it began. They were scarcely 10 paces apart when Nathan spotted Shibuku's furtive movements. With no intention of conserving his ocular power, Nathan unleashed his Mangekyo Sharingan in an instant. Like twin black suns, the tomoe swirled into his irises. Shibuku didn't even know what the eyes meant, but their hypnotic pull forced him to look away, and that split-second hesitation was all Nathan needed. Nathan seized the momentary hesitation in Shibuku's defense and struck without warning. "Ame no Minaka," he whispered, and in an instant his form dissolved into thin air. Before Shibuku could even register Nathan's disappearance, he reappeared behind him, silently chanting the next incantation, self-inflicted curse seal. Dark, swirling runes spread over Shibuku's body like living ink, pinning him rigid where he stood. Nathan followed up with a powerful palm strike to the base of Shibuku's skull. A veil of darkness swamped Shibuku's vision. He slumped forward, unconscious. Instinctively, Nathan reached out and caught him before he could topple from the narrow tree branch. Cradling Shibuku's limp form, he glanced back toward Takian village, replaying every detail of the ambush in his mind. Had he missed anything? After a moment's review, he allowed himself a quiet nod. The plan was flawless. As for the earlier incidents, his disguise as Yuichi Mizutani, his covert presence in Takian village, they would remain unspoken. Even if anyone discovered his ruse, it would only prove he'd come prepared. No one would ever uncover his true identity. In the skirmish just now, Nathan called upon Ame no Minaka several times, and even once tapped into the Flying Thunder God technique, yet he never exposed any glaring weaknesses. His mastery of Ame no Minaka has always relied on painstaking caution. He's never leaked a single secret about it. The only thread that might tie these feats back to him is Kirigakure, and it's virtually unthinkable that Kirigakure would hand over such vital information to Takian village. In other words, there's no immediate cause for alarm. As for the Flying Thunder God technique, it remains little more than rumor, hardly a smoking gun. Hen went out of his way in that fight to conceal his methods. The ninjutsu and other abilities he unleashed in those split-second exchanges bore no obvious link to the Uchiha clan or to him personally. Even when he activated his Mangekyo Sharingan, he did so entirely out of sight, used it in a single, swift motion, and then shut it down. There's almost no way anyone could have traced him from those fleeting clues. The one detail that does warrant attention is how he managed to restrain the seven tails inside the sealing chamber. That technique, whatever its true nature, may be the only lead anyone can pursue. The self-inflicted curse seal was no ordinary sealing technique. If someone were determined enough, they might piece together a few fragments of its secret, but as one of Danzo's most closely guarded trump cards, virtually no reliable information had ever leaked out. All Takian village could confirm was that it had originated in Konogakure. Beyond that, the trail went cold. More detailed intel was unlikely to surface anytime soon, and by the time it did, Nathan would almost certainly have become an unstoppable force in the ninja world. Why bother chasing such trivial leads? He exhaled softly, a satisfied glimmer in his eyes. Gathering Shibuku in one hand, Nathan methodically erased every trace left behind by the two intruders. Then he reached out with his chakra, seeking the familiar pulse of his flying thunder god seal. It throbbed faintly on the island in the southern sea of the Land of Fire. With a single, confident thought, he activated the flying thunder god technique. In the next instant, the world around him blurred and snapped away. When his vision cleared, Nathan stood once more on the island's rocky shore. The humid, salt-kissed breeze drifted over him, and he closed his eyes, letting the wind wash away every lingering worry. Here, amid the endless expanse of sea and sky, he felt truly at ease. Nathan let out a contented sigh as he took in the familiar surroundings of his hidden sanctuary. Rising to his feet, he swiftly wove a series of hand seals, channeling chakra into the wind-release, wind-wing technique. A mantle of feathered air, his chakra Hagoromo, sprang to life around him. And with Shibuku cradled in his arms, he lifted off into the sky. The deserted island where he had first tested the wind release, Rasen Shuriken, lay not far away. In minutes, Nathan descended onto its barren shore. Jagged rocks and deep scorch marks still marred the landscape from his previous experiments. He activated his Byakugan and scanned the area, wings fluttering lightly behind him. Satisfied that no one was watching, he landed squarely at the island's center. Kneeling, Nathan planted his palm against the parched earth and poured a surge of earth-released chakra into it. The ground shuddered, cracked, and then split open, revealing a dark tunnel leading downward. Without hesitation, he slung Shibuku securely under one arm and stepped into the newly formed passage. The tunnel's walls were rough-hewn stone, slick with moisture in places. After a short descent, it opened into a vast underground chamber. The cavern was empty, silent, except for the distant drip of water echoing off stone walls. Nathan set Shibuku down and surveyed the room, already plotting the next stage of his training in this hidden refuge. This was exactly what Nathan had planned. The newly carved tunnel and the chamber at its end had been formed entirely by his earth-release chakra, so of course it was empty. He stepped inside, threw Shibuku to the floor, then withdrew a sealing scroll from his pouch. Unfurling it, he set out a brush and ink. Without a word, he knelt and began painting the intricate sigils of the self-inflicted curse seal across the earthen floor. Technically, Nathan could deploy the seal with hand signs alone to immobilize an enemy, but that method only offers a fleeting hold and demands constant chakra to maintain. By inscribing the glyphs into the ground, he created a far more stable sealing array. It would still require chakra to axe, Tivat, but the physical formation would save him immense effort. Once completed, Shibuku would remain trapped here until Nathan finished mastering the 8-trigram sealing style. Then, he would layer additional Fuyin Jutsu to forge a vessel capable of containing the 7 tails. The entire process wouldn't take long, and when it was done, no power on Earth would free that beast. Meanwhile, Nathan could tap Shibuku as an extra chakra reservoir, making daily visits to siphon its energy, just like the chakra batteries he'd crafted 2 years before. Chapter 710, Harvest and Distribution. Nathan studied the floor beneath him as he carefully traced the final strokes of the curse mark inscriptions. After nearly 30 minutes, he set his brush and inkstone aside, drew a steady breath, and raised his hand in a precise seal. With a surge of chakra, the glyphs on the ground flared to life, no longer merely a seal but a full-blown self-karma curse binding array. The runes writhed, then unfurled into 9 obsidian black chains that shot upward. They coiled tight around Shemu's limbs, looped around his neck, and cinched him at the front, back, and both sides of his waist. The spell forced the unconscious man to his feet, as though each link were an iron rod suspending him in midair. Thick, inky sigils flickered across his skin, the curse marks weaving him into the very fabric of the sealing array. A ragged groan escaped Shemu's throat. He blinked slowly, consciousness returning in waves. All around him, the cellar lay empty and silent, its only occupant bound and bewildered by the black chains that held him aloft. Confusion and pain etched across his face. Shemu struggled to make sense of his grim new reality. Shemu's eyes went wide when he saw Nathan standing before him. Instinctively, he braced himself for a fight, but no sooner had he moved than 9 ebony chains shot out, coiling around his limbs. A faint glow pulsed from the chains, activating the curse-mark sigils etched across his skin and binding him in place. "This is," Shemu began, his gaze flicking to the dark links holding him fast. "A sealing array?" Though he framed it as a question, his tone carried the confidence of certainty. As the son of Takian Village's former chief, Shemu's knowledge ran deep enough to recognize sophisticated techniques at a glance. But awareness was one thing, undoing them was another entirely. He studied the flawless symmetry of the chains and the intricate runes along his arms. This wasn't just any trap, it was a high-level seal, perfected by Nathan himself. Shemu's understanding of sealing arts, though respectable, fell far short of what would be needed to dismantle such a complex array. He grimaced, realizing that breaking free in any hurry was simply impossible. All he could do was struggle against the unyielding bonds and wait for an opening that might never come. As for the 7 tails sealed inside him, Nathan didn't have to worry about it, lending any real assistance. Among the tailed beasts, only Shikaku, the 1 tail, and Gyuki, the 8 tails, truly understood human ninjutsu and sealing techniques. The others, even with their tremendous power and human-level intelligence, were nothing more than wild brutes. In short, the 7 tails had no hope of breaking the seal. Shemu would remain bound by the self-karma curse binding array for the foreseeable future. Satisfied, Nathan let his shoulders drop in relief. He turned his back on Shemu's furious eyes and strode up the tunnel. At the entrance, he lifted his hand, formed the ram seal, and activated the shadow clone technique. With a puff of chakra-charged smoke, a perfect replica of Nathan appeared in the tunnel's mouth. He offered a curt nod to his clone. "You'll hold this position. Alert me immediately if anything happens." "Understood," the shadow clone replied in the same clipped tone. Nathan nodded at the instructions and stepped into the small chamber prepared beside him. From the very beginning, he had never planned to leave Shemu alone in that enclosure. Although the self-karma curse binding array holding her was reputedly unbreakable, Nathan believed it was wiser to guard against any unexpected complications. His solution was simple: leave a shadow clone behind to keep watch. Beyond mere security, he needed someone to extract the tailed beast chakra that was steadily accumulating within Shemu's body. Technically, he could handle the extractions himself. It wouldn't be difficult, but it would interrupt his own schedule. A shadow clone, however, could perform the siphoning and then transfer every drop of chakra bak to him when dissolved. There would be a small loss in the process, but nothing he couldn't accept. All Nathan had to do was dispatch clones at regular intervals, and each one would return with its share of chakra. The only question that remained was, how much chakra could Shemu yield in a single day? He found his answer on the second night. 200,000 chakra points. That was right, 200,000, more than enough to keep Nathan's power reserves well and decisively topped up. Nathan stared at the chakra meter, frowning. For a tailed beast, 200,000 chakra points was almost trivial, even laughably small. Yet that was exactly what his shadow clone had managed to siphon from Shemu's body today, no more and no less. The culprit was unmistakable. The 7 Tails' spirit had grown suspicious of his plan. Even when Nathan deliberately tore a small rent in the 4 symbols seal, it stubbornly refused to disgorge any extra energy. Those 200,000 points had slipped out entirely of its own accord. He couldn't pry the seal any wider without inviting trouble. And trouble was the last thing he needed right now. If the spirit wasn't a fool, it would simply bide its time, waiting for him to yank the seal open farther. then strike without mercy. True, Nathan's Mangekyo Sharingan gave him confidence in a direct confrontation, and a bigger opening might yield a richer harvest of chakra. But the risk was enormous. A single miscalculation could turn this delicate extraction into a life-or-death battle. So he settled for the safer path. Harvesting 200,000 points each day wasn't nothing. It already amounted to nearly 1/5 of his own daily chakra regeneration. It wasn't a fortune, but it was clean, steady growth, and far preferable to gambling everything on one reckless gambit. Nathan could harness his chakra to accelerate his skill growth. Today, he'd already funneled a full 200,000 points. Surprisingly, he chose not to pour them into the Bagua sealing technique, even though it desperately needed improvement. He'd already invested 306,000 chakra points in that art, granting him 2,040 proficiency points per day, but only by deploying multiple shadow clones in simultaneous practice. Further investment would force him to spawn even more clones, and despite faster clone recovery and continual status updates, the resulting chakra drain would be so immense that it would undermine the effort itself. After careful consideration, Nathan abandoned that idea and redirected his chakra reserves toward other abilities instead. After careful recalculation, Nathan redistributed his chakra reserves as follows. He poured an additional 63,000 points into Water Style, Great Waterfall Technique, raising its daily chakra investment from 87,000 to 150,000, and boosting its proficiency gain from 725 to 1,050 points. Next, he increased Earth Style, Earthflow River by 60,000 points, lifting its daily chakra cost to 100,000 and its proficiency gain to 1,000 points. Then he allocated another 50,000 points to Illusion, Darkness Technique, doubling its daily expenditure to 100,000 chakra and its proficiency gain to 830 points. Finally, with the remaining 27,000 points, he enhanced Temple of Nirvana Technique, bringing its daily chakra use from 50,000 to 77,000 and its proficiency gain from 415 to 640 points. With the extra 200,000 chakra points he'd invested, Nathan's progress would skyrocket. All that remained was steady, disciplined practice and patience while the Bagua sealing worked its course over the next month. As he pondered the path ahead, he deliberately quieted his racing thoughts. Once he'd confirmed that the frontline camp was running smoothly, he slipped away alone into the heart of the island. There, tucked among the towering pines, stood the modest wooden cabin he'd built only recently. Nathan stepped inside without a word. The soft glow of dusk filtered through the windows, but he barely noticed. Throwing off his cloak, he sank onto the simple cot in the corner, and, wearied by the day's exertions, drifted into a deep, dreamless sleep. Chapter 711, Promotion After Promotion. The next morning, on the same small island, Nathan awoke. He spent a moment absorbing and integrating the combat experience and memories his shadow clones had gathered over the last hour, converting them into genuine skill improvements. Once that process completed, he raised his hand and began to form the seals for the multiple shadow clone technique, intending to spawn another dozen clones and continue his training. But mid-seal, Nathan paused. He closed his eyes again and stood perfectly still as seconds ticked into minutes. When he finally opened his eyes, a thoughtful gleam shone in them. With a quick mental command, he brought up his proficiency panel. Just as he'd suspected, that final casting of the multiple shadow clone technique had pushed him over the threshold. Its proficiency bar jumped from level 8 to level 900, officially classifying it as an A-rank ninjutsu. Nathan tapped the panel again, eager to inspect the finer details of the upgrade. Nathan scanned the training field, noting that his dozen lingering shadow clones hadn't yet dispersed. With a casual flick of his wrist, he released the seals. In an instant, poof, 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 a swirl of chakra smoke marked their disappearance. Without missing a beat, Nathan settled his feet, brought his hands together in the ram seal, and wove through the familiar seals of the multi-shadow clone technique. In the next heartbeat, 12 exact replicas of himself materialized, where only thin air had been moments before. As the new clones solidified, Nathan focused inward, comparing the energy flow of this casting with his previous attempts. He just elevated the technique from level 8 to level 9, and the changes were already clear. First and foremost, chakra consumption had been slashed in half, where each clone once drained 4% of its total chakra reserves. Now it sipped only 2%. With only a handful of clones active, this improvement felt subtle. His main body could easily top off any deficit. But as soon as he imagined summoning hundreds or even thousands of shadows at once, the savings would become monumental. Nathan allowed himself a small, satisfied smile. Leveling up his shadow clone technique was one thing. Mastering it, so it could fuel an army of mirrors without draining him dry, was quite another. He flexed his hand, ready to push the jutsu even further. Nathan's original body now only had to allocate a tiny fraction of his chakra to each clone, which made the 2% cost reduction far more significant than it initially sounded. With his reserves at roughly 300,000 chakra points, a 2% saving amounted to 6,000 points every time he cast the technique. In a drawn-out battle, repeatedly conserving 6,000 points each cast would add up quickly, an advantage Nathan couldn't afford to ignore. On top of that, the upgrade to his multiple shadow clone technique had dramatically increased the stability of every duplicate he produced. At level 8, his clones could already shrug off the lingering after-effects of many ninjutsu attacks. Now, at level 9, they'd undergone a true qualitative leap in durability. In addition to resisting residual chakra assaults even more effectively, the clones could now withstand superficial slashes and blunt impacts from sharp weapons. Deep, piercing wounds remained their only weak spot, but as long as any cuts stayed shallow and didn't accumulate, each clone would hold together instead of disintegrating. With his upgraded multiple shadow clone technique, Nathan now held a clear advantage whether he used his clones as bait, luring foes to strike phantoms while he struck from another angle, or launched a direct assault with dozens of shadows at his side. Even more significant was the newfound ease of casting the jutsu. No longer did he have to calculate the exact toll it would take on his reserves. It had become almost instinctive, an internal gauge telling him precisely how many clones he could sustain without weakening his true body. Tasks that once demanded on's concentration were now effortless. In effect, he had eliminated the very flaw that had condemned the multiple shadow clone technique as forbidden. It may seem like a small change, but in life-or-death moments, being free of worries about chakra depletion could mean the difference between victory and defeat. After all, a single lapse in focus can prove fatal. Nathan paused for a moment, gathering his thoughts, then quietly set his plans into motion. As usual, he reviewed each of his shadow clones and assigned them their cultivation schedules before dismissing them. With the clones gone, he turned his attention to reallocating the 95,000 daily chakra points he'd just freed up by perfecting the multiple shadow clone technique. He opened his skill panel and surveyed the list. His gaze settled on the shuriken shadow clone technique. Its current mastery level had always lagged slightly behind the multiple shadow clone technique, but thanks to several days of focused practice, it was now close to perfection. Nathan decided to push it all the way to completion. Starting immediately, he would pour the entire 95,000 chakra points he no longer needed for multi-clones into the shuriken technique, on top of the 105,000 points he'd been investing every day. 200,000 chakra points in total would flow into refining this one skill. With that infusion, his daily proficiency gain would jump from 700 points to 1,330. This surge of energy, he knew, would bring him that much closer to mastering one of his most vital techniques. Based on Nathan's current rate of progress, he should need no more than 2 days to break through to the perfect level 0.9 realm. Even more pressing, however, is his water release, great waterfall technique, which is poised to advance ahead of schedule. 4 days ago, when his spirit attribute vaulted past 40,000 out of 50,000 thanks to the Sharingan evolution breakthrough, the technique's proficiency was already at 16,350 of 20,000, level 0.7. Since then, Nathan has spent every waking moment refining it. One of those days even saw him pour in an extra 63,000 chakra points. Now, 4 days later, his mastery sits at 19,720,000. At this pace, the Great Waterfall technique will hit level 8 by tonight. There is one catch. As an A-rank ninjutsu, its proficiency cap is level 9. Once Nathan reaches that ceiling, he won't be able to recover any of the chakra he's invested. All of it will be locked into the technique. As for his other skills, Illusion Technique, Dark Blackout, and the Nirvana Temple Technique, those two have received hefty chakra infusions, but they'll need roughly a week more before they too can break through to their next levels. Meanwhile, Nathan reviewed his skill progress display. Earth Release, Earth Flow River, thanks to its relatively low learning curve and a hefty chakra investment, would hit the upper limit of B-rank ninjutsu, level 700, in at most 5 days. By contrast, both the Flying Thunder God technique and 8 trigram ceiling would languish without any breakthrough for another 10.5 months. Having clarified his timetable, Nathan shut off the panel and settled into his training routine. He alternated mystical palm technique to shore up his physical strength with heart reflection technique to refine his mental focus, all while coaxing his Sharingan to evolve further. Each cycle left him drained, yet steadily more capable. Time slipped by in measured increments. When he finally opened his eyes, a full day had passed. Just as predicted, his multiple shadow clone technique had leveled up, and to his satisfaction, his water release, Great Waterfall technique, had also advanced. Nathan allowed himself a small, determined smile. The path ahead promised even greater gains. Chapter 7:12, New Skills and Promotion Days slipped by in silence. In the 2 since the skirmish, nothing had disturbed the frontline camp. An uneasy peace settled over the ghost-crying forest. The Cloud-Hidden Village's reconnaissance team had long since withdrawn, and though Nathan and Nara Fufeng kept watch for another surprise attack, they gradually relaxed. Cloud Hidden was renowned for its martial fervor, but it was no fool. Their sudden strike hadn't been an outright declaration of war, but a calculated probe, an opportunity to test the Hidden Leaf Village's defenses and to measure the new 4th Hokage, Wei Feng Shuiman's, approach to leadership. Once they'd gathered the intelligence they needed, they had no intention of pressing further. Warriors who wager everything in a skirmish must also know when to cut their losses. Having risked manpower on this raid, they were well aware that a full-scale retaliation from the Leaf would inevitably follow, and that risk wasn't one they were willing to take. So the ghost-crying forest remained still, and the day passed into night without fanfare. In the quiet that followed, Nathan allowed himself to breathe a little easier, knowing that, for now at least, the frontier remained calm, and that the real battles, both political and personal, were still to come. Indeed, the loss of 3 elite squads stung the Cloud-Hidden Village, but it was far from crippling. As one of the great Shinobi strongholds, they could absorb such casualties and still stand firm. Predictably, the conflict would settle back into its previous pattern of minor skirmishes for the foreseeable future. This outcome suited Nathan perfectly. Freed from the need to pour himself into the front lines, he could now devote his full attention to his own cultivation. Nathan centered himself and summoned his proficiency panel. As he'd seen 2 days ago, none of his existing skills had progressed. Yet to his surprise, a brand new entry blinked into view: Ninpo, mind-reading technique. He recalled finding scattered notes on this forbidden art within the Yamanaka clan archives, hidden among Danzo's private collection. Ever since, he'd dispatched shadow clones to pore over the fragments in his spare time, and now the technique had solidified on his panel, waiting to be mastered. After nearly 2 weeks of study, Nathan finally crafted his own mind-reading secret technique, combining ancient scrolls records with everything he'd learned from the illusion art, Sharingan. He called it Ninpo, mind-reading technique. Right now it sits comfortably at its introductory level 1 because he simply doesn't have the spare chakra to refine it further. That said, Nathan isn't worried. Before long, his Shuriken Shadow Clone technique will hit the perfect state, level 900, and he'll earn an extra 200,000 chakra points every day. With that surplus, he can devote a portion exclusively to advancing his new mind-reading skill. In addition, there's no pressing threat that demands he use it immediately. And if an urgent situation does arise, he still has the illusion art, sharing on, to fall back on. All things considered, Nathan is in no rush. Nathan shook off the last of his days, closed the hatch of the seal, and stood perfectly still. Almost at once, a surge of chakra materialized out of thin air and streamed into his body. With it came a faint, half-formed memory, not his own, but the recollection of the shadow clone that had been assigned to guard Shamu. He shut his eyes and focused, sorting through the images racing through his mind. In moments he confirmed that Shamu was safe and that the power of the seven tails inside him remained unchanged. Satisfied, he brought his hands together in the Ren seal and once more unleashed his ninjutsu, the multiple shadow clone technique. A thunderous roar of chakra smoke filled the clearing. When it cleared, more than a dozen Nathans stood before him. Nathan scanned the ranks, then pointed to one of the clones. "You, go to the seven tails." "Understood," the clone replied without hesitation. With a flick of chakra, it activated wind release, wings of wind, and cloaked itself in a thin veil of chakra. Within seconds, it soared into the sky, streaking toward the deserted island in the distance. Nathan watched until the duplicate became nothing more than a speck, then vanished from sight. Nathan drew his gaze back to the clearing, assigned each of his peers a cultivation task as usual, and then settled in for his third training session of the day. Since sunrise, he'd already spent over 2 hours cultivating and absorbed 2 full cycles of the seven-tailed beast's chakra. It wasn't that he didn't want to draw more at once. The beast's chakra had to permeate slowly. So Nathan simply synchronized the chakra extractions with the moments he refreshed his shadow clones, an efficient way to avoid unnecessary complications. Brushing aside stray thoughts, he focused entirely on his practice. Morning slipped away, and before he knew it, it was noon. Once more, he dissolved his shadow clones, absorbing their memories and hard-won experience. As the last echoes of their training settled, Nathan sensed a surge of power and realized his shuriken shadow clone technique had advanced to level 9. Nathan sat in stillness, breathing evenly as dozens of ethereal shurikens hovered around him, proof of his latest breakthrough. This was his 5th perfected A-rank ninjutsu, following the spiral pill, healing hands technique, mind reflection technique, and water style, great shark bullet technique. Reviewing every moment of his recent practice, Nathan felt his mastery of the shuriken shadow clone technique deepen by several levels. He could now manifest a greater number of shadow shurikens in a single casting and guide each one with razor-sharp precision. In his hands, the technique's offensive power would surge, raising the threat it posed to lower and mid-ranked shinobi to a whole new level. Even a seasoned jonin, caught in a disciplined barrage, would find it hard to mount an effective defense. Perfecting this ninjutsu also sharpened Nathan's chakra control. His proficiency score leapt nearly 1,000 points, putting him at level 6 with 9,100 out of 10,000 points, well on the way to level 7. He sensed instinctively that once he crossed that threshold and the technique underwent its qualitative transformation, his chakra consumption across all ninjutsu would drop dramatically. Future training would become far more efficient, and his climb through the ninja ranks would accelerate accordingly. With resolve hardening in his eyes, Nathan rose to his feet. He had no intention of resting on his laurels. Ahead lay fresh trials, and he meant to master each one. Nathan tapped into the newly expanded well of chakra and felt the difference immediately. With today's increase, he would have an extra 200,000 points of freely available chakra to spend each day. After a moment's thought, he allocated 91,000 points to the Flying Thunder God technique. Combined with the 209,000 points he'd already invested, that brought the total to a solid 300,000. As a result, his daily proficiency gain on this jutsu would jump from 1,390 points to 2,000, a huge leap toward mastering level 8. That left 109,000 points to spare. Without hesitation, Nathan funneled them into the brand new Ninpo mind-reading technique. From his earlier tests, he knew that his exceptional mental strength meant the technique only cost about 100 chakra points per proficiency point, far less than average. At that rate, 109,000 chakra yielded a 1,090-point increase in proficiency overnight. Leaning back, Nathan felt a thrill of satisfaction. His skills were advancing faster than ever, and every investment today would pay dividends on the battlefield tomorrow. Nathan had every reason to believe his new skill would soon advance by leaps and bounds, making it far easier to read a target's memories at will. No sooner had he calibrated his chakra than he sprang into action. Hands flashing into seals, he unleashed the multiple shadow clone technique once more. With a thunderous pop, a cloud of cross smoke billowed outward, and when it cleared, over a dozen Nathans stood arrayed across the clearing. Pointing to one of the clones, Nathan ordered, "You, head to the deserted island, relieve the last clone, stand guard, and keep siphoning the Seven Tails chakra." The appointed double hurried off, while the rest snapped to attention and resumed their training under Nathan's watchful eye. Chapter 713, Inventory. 2 more days slipped by like water flowing downstream. This morning, after more than a week of relentless training, Nathan's Earth Release, Earth Flow River finally perfected itself at level 700. With that breakthrough came an extra 100,000 chakra points he could freely allocate. Then, as if the heavens themselves approved of his efforts, his illusion technique, Dark Blackout, climbed to level 100,000 that very afternoon. Now, on Central Island, Nathan opened his eyes. He'd just finished absorbing every scrap of battle data and memory from his shadow clones. Satisfied, he raised his chin and issued the command he'd come to rely on. Panel. In an instant, the shimmering proficiency interface appeared before him, ready to display his hard-won progress and the fruits of his training. A soft chime sounded, and a translucent, light blue panel materialized before Nathan's eyes, his familiar status screen. Line by line, it updated his latest progress. Name, Uchiha Nathan. Age, 13. Body constitution, 22. Spiritual energy, 23. Chakra reserves, 215,500. Through 4. Bloodline abilities. Sharingan Menjikyo, 41,728 5028. Byakugan, 100,000. Techniques and skill levels. Chakra refining technique, Liv 6. 2,320 10,000. Water release. Great exploding water surge, Liv 8. 6,000 50,000. Lightning release. Lightning body technique, 1. 7,200. Lightning release. Chakra mode, Liv 0. 2,100. Flying thunder god technique. Liv 7. 16,650 vs 20,000. Ninja arts, mind reading technique. Liv 4. 480s 2,000. Illusion technique, Dark Blackout. Liv 7. 120,000. Nirvana temple technique. Liv 6. 8,030 10,000. 8 trigrams ceiling. Liv 7. 14,320,000. Chakra scalpel. Liv 16,420,000. Shadow sword technique. Liv 6. 8,000 10,000. Chakra control. Liv 6. 9,110,000. Perfected skills, mastered at highest attainable level. Self-inflicted curse. Mark Liv 7. 4 symbols seal Liv 7. Multiple shadow clone technique. Liv 9. Shuriken shadow clone technique. Earth flow river Liv 7. As he stepped back, Nathan allowed himself a small smile. In just a week's time, his growth had been explosive, proof that his relentless training was paying off. Nathan stared at his latest progress report in disbelief. Not only had the number of jutsu he'd perfected jumped by 5, but he'd also unlocked 2 powerful new techniques, 8 trigram sealing and the ninja art, mind reading technique. He'd already pushed 8 trigram sealing to level 7, with 14,300 out of 20,000 proficiency points earned. At his current rate, in just 3 days he'd hit level 8, and from that milestone, it would take only about 25 more days to refine it to a perfect level 9. When that happened, Nathan would finally be able to channel the Seven Tails chakra directly, after fashioning the proper sealing scrolls and containers, rather than scraping together whatever leftovers he could scavenge now. Full mastery of the Seven Tails meant virtually limitless chakra reserves, and with that wellspring at his disposal, every one of his skills would skyrocket in power and speed. Of course, the real test wouldn't be his body, but his mind. To tap into the Seven Tails' true potential, he'd have to create and mentally manage scores of shadow clones training in parallel. That level of sustained focus would push any shinobi's mental endurance to its breaking point. But if Nathan succeeded, nothing in the ninja world would stand in his way. Nathan could still manage a dozen or so shadow clones without breaking a sweat, but dozens or hundreds felt like a stretch. Each clone had to endure high-intensity training, and the sheer volume of memory data they carried was staggering. Just thinking about it made his head throb. Thankfully, the evolution of his Sharingan had boosted his spirit attribute. Without that extra edge, he'd be completely overwhelmed. Even so, Nathan wasn't about to spawn an army of clones right away. He'd stick to a modest number, at least until he found a more efficient way to raise his spirit. He had a few ideas in mind, but none were feasible yet, so he'd have to shelve them for the time being. Shifting his focus, Nathan turned from the 8 trigram sealing technique to the ninja art, mind-reading technique. It demanded less raw power, relying instead on steady, incremental progress. As he'd anticipated, the skill had exploded from level 1 to level 4 in just 2 days. At his current pace of 1,090 proficiency points per day, he figured he'd hit level 5 in no more than a day and a half. Less than 5 days remain before this technique reaches level 6, and in just 9 more days it will break through to level 7, the very limit of its potential. In other words, Nathan's freshly learned jutsu will be fully mastered in about half a month. Such rapid progress was almost unheard of. He let out a quiet sigh, easing his focus off those 2 skills and returning to the rest of his arsenal. As with those techniques, his other jutsu had made significant strides. His water release, Great Exploding Water Surge, had surged ahead to level 8, its progress bar already over 10% full. At this rate, in about a month, he would claim his 6th perfected A-rank jutsu, one with tremendous versatility in battle. Meanwhile, after plowing an extra 91,000 chakra points into it, his Flying Thunder God technique had also accelerated. It now stood at level 7 with 16,615 out of 200,000 proficiency points, just over 2 days away from level 8. His illusion technique, Dark Blackout, and the Nirvana Temple technique were riding the same wave of improvement, steadily climbing toward higher ranks. In every corner of his skill set, Nathan could feel the power swelling. With each passing hour, he edged closer to unleashing some of the most formidable jutsu in the shinobi world. Nathan glanced at his skill panel. One technique had just reached level 7, while his level 6 Nirvana Temple technique sat at 8,030 of 10,000 proficiency. After a moment's thought, he decided to pour 23,000 of the 100,000 chakra points he'd banked upon mastering Earth Release, Earth Flow River into Nirvana Temple technique. That would raise his daily chakra investment in the skill to 100,000, the same as illusion technique, Dark Blackout, boosting his daily proficiency gain from 640 to 830 and accelerating its growth. With 77,000 chakra points left over, Nathan divided them between 2 other arts. He allotted 41,000 points to ninja art, mind-reading technique to hasten its advancement, and the remaining 36,000 to shadow sword technique. He'd developed Shadow Sword before learning Lightning Release, Lightning Blade, but Lightning Blade was now virtually perfected, just 2,000 proficiency points short of full mastery. Nathan had only poured a modest 4,000 chakra points into the technique so far, which explained why its performance still lagged behind his expectations. In the past, he'd been obsessed with squeezing the maximum benefit from every drop of chakra, but he'd long since abandoned that approach. Now, he was free to pour in vast reserves at will, accelerating his mastery instead of worrying about efficiency. His plan was simple: summon more shadow clones and drill the technique relentlessly. With his recent gains already reviewed and a detailed cultivation schedule mapped out in his mind, Nathan closed the assessment panel. He raised his hands, wove the familiar seals, and activated the multiple shadow clone technique once again. This time, 20 identical Nathans sprang into being. He assigned one clone the task of guarding the 7 tails and drawing upon its chakra. Then, he distributed training regimens among the remaining 19. With all tasks in place, the clones dispersed, leaving Nathan alone in the training chamber. He settled into a deep meditative state, chakra swirling around him as he refined his skills. And just like that, hours slipped away in the quiet hum of his cultivation. Chapter 714, return time truly flies. In what feels like the blink of an eye, another half-month has slipped by. Since the day we received our transfer orders and departed the village, almost a full month has passed. Our second wave of reinforcements from home has already arrived, and fresh intelligence confirms that Union Village's threat has effectively been neutralized. No major attack is expected in the near future, so this outpost will soon revert to its previous peacekeeping routine. With the crisis averted, there's simply no need to keep such a large contingent of elite soldiers on standby. This morning, Nathan received formal orders. The troops would return to the village in stages, and he himself was on the very first rotation. At first, Nathan had no intention of going along. The return route posed far fewer risks than the journey out, and sending a shadow clone to guide the escort party would have been purely ceremonial and more than adequate. Yet, the more he considered it, the more he realized that his presence still mattered. In the end, he decided he would accompany his men home in person. Nathan didn't think the journey home would be especially treacherous. He only realized that after 2 weeks of unrelenting cultivation, he desperately needed a mental reset. For the past half-month, he'd operated like a machine, either immersed in his training or racing to the next practice site. While he'd completed every goal on schedule and made remarkable progress, the fatigue he carried was accumulating fast. A break was overdue. Returning to the village with his team seemed like the perfect solution. It didn't mean he was abandoning cultivation altogether. Far from it. Having spent over 2.5 days rushing to their current location, they no longer faced the same time pressure. This allowed Nathan to dial back the intensity without throwing away all his hard work. He would continue his daily practice, but more moderately. That meant limiting his sessions with the mystical palm technique and the mind's eye technique, both of which demanded total focus, to short routines at night. During the day, he'd let himself rest, clearing his head and rebuilding his energy without sacrificing the steady progress he'd fought so hard to achieve. Nathan continued to train 4 of his most powerful jutsu: water release, great exploding water colliding wave, the flying thunder god technique, illusion technique, dark blackout, and the 8 trigram ceiling style, by sending out shadow clones. He deliberately throttled the intensity back to roughly 1/3 of his previous effort, freeing up resources for other breakthroughs. Meanwhile, 2 of his techniques had already reached perfection. 4 days ago, after Earth Release, Earth Flow River achieved mastery and granted him an extra 41,000 chakra points, Nathan's daily chakra pool swelled by 150,000. He immediately funneled all of it into Dark Blackout, accelerating its growth until it too hit level 7, Arrow Perfection. Even earlier, he had perfected Shadow Sword technique. Although he didn't manage the theoretical minimum of 2 or 3 days, his unrestricted chakra investment saw it to level 700 in under a week. With Shadow Sword technique now flawless, Nathan has fully compensated for his prior weaknesses in close quarters combat. Nathan had finally perfected the close combat system he'd always envisioned: top-tier swordsmanship, augmented by 3 ultimate techniques: instantaneous sword technique, illusionary sword technique, and shadow sword technique. He calculated that if he activated his Sharingan now, his hand-to-hand prowess would spike by another 20 to 30%. Combined with the lightning release taijutsu he'd learned in Union Village, Lightning Flash, he was confident he could match anyone in melee. Even a master like Might Guy wouldn't pose a real threat unless he opened at least the 5th gate of the 8 gates. Should Guy push beyond that, to the 7th or 8th gates, Nathan planned to keep his distance. Once Might Guy unleashed the gate of Cuff Death, he'd gain near superhuman power, able even to twist space itself. At that level, not only Guy's taijutsu but his ninjutsu and genjutsu would be nearly unstoppable. Nathan, however, felt no fear. His own trump card, Ameno Tejikara, was tailor-made to neutralize spatial distortion. With his perfected sword style, Sharingan-enhanced reflexes, and the ace in his sleeve, he was ready for whatever challenges lay ahead. Mastering the Shadow Sword technique had a surprising side effect. Nathan now received an extra 40,000 chakra points each day to allocate as he wished. Without hesitation, he poured every one of those points into the Nirvana Temple technique, boosting its development rate dramatically. Shaking off his thoughts, Nathan rejoined his teammates' sprint toward the village. Along the way, they passed crumbling hamlets and streams of displaced civilians. The scars of the Third Shinobi World War were still fresh. Inside the Land of Fire, unrest lingered. This instability was exactly why Konoha had urgently recalled them. Their squad numbered only 100 shinobi, but each was handpicked for excellence. Even if a single member could not hold ground alone, they were more than capable of leading a small unit to clear 1 or 2 bandit camps. In effect, 100 shinobi became 100 strike teams, a formidable force to help Konoha Village restore order across the Land of Fire. As soon as the fighting on the front line settled, the village issued an urgent recall. 5 days later, Nathan and the others returned home, and the difference was unmistakable. Though barely a month had passed, Konoha brimmed with renewed energy. The dilapidated stalls and silent alleyways of old had been swept away. In their place stood bustling markets, chatting vendors, and children sparring in the streets. Everywhere he looked, Nathan saw proof of a community revived. "They must be overjoyed with our new Hokage, Namikaze Minato," he murmured as he walked weaving through the crowd. Leadership, he reminded himself, always sets the tone for its people. Under the third Hokage, Hiruzen Sarutobi, the village had fallen into a gentle decline, respectful but weary. Hiruzen's advancing years had ushered in a twilight of cautious tradition. Unwittingly, he'd left the younger shinobi longing for change. Now, with Minato's dynamic vision at the helm, Konoha's true spirit had finally been rekindled. In an alternate timeline, after Namikaze Minato fell sealing the Nine Tails and Hiruzen Sarutobi resumed the role of third Hokage, many of Konoha's younger shinobi grew disillusioned and began neglecting their duties. Because ninja are the backbone of any shinobi village, their morale directly shapes the spirit of the entire community. A handful of skeptics might not do much harm, but when the majority adopts that apathetic mindset, the village inevitably loses its vitality. Under Hiruzen's second tenure, this collective malaise was a key reason for Konoha's gradual decline. In contrast, Minato's youth and boundless drive would have infused the village with fresh energy and purpose. Chapter 715, Relearning. Nathan walked purposefully along the path from the village entrance to the Hokage's office, his gaze quietly taking in every detail while his mind ran through the mission report. Before long, he arrived at the grand entrance of the Hokage building. Straightening his flak jacket and smoothing his hair, he stepped inside without hesitation. On the first floor, Nathan and his team completed the official handover in the lobby's mission office. Documents were exchanged, seals were stamped, and the clerk gave them a curt nod of approval. Once everything was in order, Nathan dismissed his squad and made his way alone up the marble staircase to the second floor, where the Hokage's private chamber awaited. It was standard practice for the lead shinobi of a major operation to brief the Hokage in person. This meeting served 2 purposes. It reinforced the bond of trust between the village leader and its most seasoned jonin, and it gave the Hokage a first-hand glimpse of the mission's scope, and by extension, the state of the wider ninja world. Nathan entered the office, bowed respectfully, and took a seat across from Minato Namikaze. Their discussion moved swiftly through the core details of the assignment: objectives, timelines, potential risks, and contingency plans. Minato's questions were precise and to the point. He made no mention of Danzo or any lingering political factions, focusing solely on the task at hand. Once they had covered every logistical facet, Minato leaned back in his chair and steepled his fingers, his expression thoughtful. "Now," he said, "I'd like to hear your impressions of our current village systems. Do you see areas we could improve? Any changes you'd recommend?" Nathan met the Hokage's gaze without hesitation. As he laid out his observations on administrative procedures, resource allocation, and communication between ranks, it became clear that Minato's interest extended far beyond a single mission. He was planting the seeds of reform, seeking input from the very shinobi entrusted with Konoha's safety. And in that moment, Nathan realized this briefing was not just about the road ahead, but about reshaping the future of the entire village. Nathan, however, had no intention of joining. Everyone knew that reform was the hardest task in any world. It might be easy to move people's spirits, but it was far more difficult to uproot their vested interests. Any effort to redistribute privileges from an established faction to a new group would inevitably spark fierce resistance from those whose benefits were threatened. True, Minato Namikaze enjoyed the support of the village's younger generation, yet as long as the older leaders remained influential, sweeping reforms would face relentless opposition. Nathan saw no reason to dive into such a bottomless vortex. With his current strength, he wasn't afraid of plots or retaliation, but if he could continue his training in peace, why invite unnecessary trouble? So when Minato subtly broached the subject, Nathan politely but firmly declined. After a brief, courteous conversation, he took his leave. First, he stopped by his favorite shop for a hearty meal, then made his way back to the Uchiha clan's territory. Nathan hadn't even set foot inside his front gate when a breathless messenger intercepted him. "Lord Fugaku Uchiha requests your presence," the attendant announced. Nathan tensed. He'd been looking forward to some quiet time, but he couldn't refuse a summons from the Uchiha clan leader. With a reluctant nod, he followed the aide through the lantern-lit streets of Konoha toward the Uchiha compound. During the short walk, Nathan's mind raced. Fugaku's summons could only concern Minato Namikaze's proposed reforms. After all, the only way to mend the widening rift between the Uchiha and the village was through a fundamental overhaul of their relationship. As a leader perpetually torn between caution and radical change, Fugaku would seize any opportunity to secure his clan's future, especially if Minato's goodwill offered a chance at a peaceful resolution. Nathan, however, had already made his position clear. He would not wade into that political storm. Still, everything pointed to this being exactly the kind of tug-of-war he'd vowed to avoid. The Uchiha estate loomed behind high walls, its gate painted in the clan's deep crimson. Inside, torchlight danced along polished floors and ornate scrollwork. Fugaku himself received Nathan in a spacious sitting room laid with tatami mats. After seating him and exchanging the usual courtesies, questions about family health, recent missions, village affairs, Fugaku leaned forward, his voice steady but urgent. "Namikaze's reforms will touch every clan standing in Konoha," Fugaku said, eyes narrowing slightly. "I need to know. Did the Hokage personally ask you to champion the Uchiha's interests?" Fugaku did not hesitate. He laid out his request plainly, urging Nathan to throw his weight behind the clan at Minato's council. Nathan met his gaze, calm but firm, as he prepared to answer. Nathan didn't see any point in stringing Fugaku Uchiha along, so he laid out his decision plainly. For a moment, Fugaku's face flickered with displeasure. He'd clearly hoped Nathan would seize this opportunity, but in the end, he simply nodded. After a few courteous farewells, Nathan took his leave. Once outside the Uchiha estate, Nathan considered heading straight home. Instead, he veered toward the clan's hidden archives. Ever since the Great Elder had entrusted him with an all-access pass to their secret vaults, Nathan had never used it. Back then, his plate had been overflowing with new skills to learn. He'd only just acquired Danzo's personal collection and hadn't been in any hurry. But time had a way of changing priorities. With most of his techniques now fully mastered and bolstered by the Seven Tails extra chakra, he at last felt ready to tackle the Uchiha's most closely guarded ninjutsu. His first target, the legendary life-saving jutsu, Izanagi. Stepping into the vault's shadowy chamber, Nathan let the heavy scroll cases slide open. Candlelight flickered over rows of lacquered boxes, each one inscribed with the Uchiha clan's ancient seal. He selected the volume on Izanagi, its cover as black as night. Spreading the scroll before him, Nathan absorbed the ritual's grim requirements. It demanded a sacrifice of vision, one Sharingan eye consumed in exchange for a single, precious moment when reality itself could be rewritten. Even his own innate gift, Ame no Minaka, which let him skirt life-and-death calamities, could not replicate the absolute control granted by Izanagi. He closed his eyes and summoned chakra, feeling the familiar rush of power from the Seven Tails coil through him. This time, however, he wouldn't simply react to danger. He intended to master the mechanics of fate. As the chamber grew quiet, save for his steady breathing, Nathan resolved to learn Izanagi thoroughly, to wield it with precision rather than desperation. From the Uchiha's hidden trove of centuries-old secrets, he would emerge with a new edge, one that could save lives, alter outcomes, and perhaps even rewrite his own destiny. Nathan knew that Izanagi wasn't truly invincible. Sooner or later, someone would develop a ninjutsu that could neutralize it. All the more reason he needed to learn it himself. Izanagi offered him a literal second chance at life, and he would never turn down an ability that could save him at the last moment. The real cost, losing sight in one Sharingan eye, barely gave him pause. When death is at the threshold, who cares about temporary blindness? Besides, it wasn't permanent. Madara Uchiha had proven that once a Sharingan evolved into a Rinnegan, any damage would be healed. With his proficiency panel guiding his progress, Nathan was supremely confident he could attain that level. He planned to learn Izanami as well, the perfect counterpart to Izanagi. With both techniques in his arsenal, no force could ever truly wipe out the Uchiha clan while he remained alive. Power so great couldn't stay hidden forever, but Nathan bore, as determined to master every safeguard. Blindness in one eye included, if that's what it took to wield his legacy without fear. To have a sword at your side without knowing how to use it is worlds apart from simply going unarmed. Nathan refused to be caught flat-footed, so he resolved to prepare every contingency in advance, anything to keep panic from setting in. Centering himself, he turned his attention to the third item on his list, the transcription seal. This sealing jutsu draws directly on the Mangekyo Sharingan's ocular power. With it, you can inscribe a specific technique, whether ninjutsu or another dojutsu, into a person's eyes or body, then trigger that power under precise conditions. Paired with Izanagi, its potential is terrifying, which made it all the more essential for Nathan to master. Yet the transcription seal constantly feeds on pupil energy. Though that energy eventually replenishes, you can't simply flood it with chakra to amplify it. Its true growth hinges on the natural strengthening of your ocular powers over time. Having noted its advantages and limitations, Nathan filed away the transcription seal and turned to the next forbidden technique on his list. Nathan stared at the ancient scrolls before him, his heart pounding with excitement. This wasn't just any ninjutsu. It was the A-rank genjutsu known as demonic illusion, mirror heaven and earth transformation. Once this technique discerns an opponent's illusion, it instantly reflects that illusion back upon its caster. He recalled how, long ago, his Sharingan had already enabled him to see through most genjutsu. What he'd lacked until now was a high-level secret technique to retaliate in kind. With mirror heaven and earth transformation newly mastered, Nathan knew that once he'd fully internalized it, he could effortlessly dispel and turn against nearly any illusion. Glancing over the 4 freshly acquired secret techniques laid out on the tatami mat, Nathan exhaled sharply. If the Uchiha clan had been wiped out centuries ago, he would have spent untold effort chasing down these scrolls. A millennium's worth of heritage was not something to discard lightly. He owed this haul to none other than Madara Uchiha's own investigations. Had Madara not already sorted through the clan's archives, their library of forbidden jutsu would be even richer. Thinking of Madara's devastating fire-style techniques, Nathan's eyes gleamed with determined mischief. "If I ever get the chance," he murmured, "I'll pay Madara's grave a visit, just to see what else he left behind." Chapter 716, Exposure. Nathan returned home after the selection trials. The courtyard lay cloaked in dust, every room thick with grime. Raising a hand, he channeled chakra to summon a gentle breeze. In an instant, wind surged through the entire compound, lifting dust and debris until the air was a hazy gray. With a second motion of his hand, Nathan guided the swirling mess into the trash bin tucked in the yard's corner. It looked effortless, but few could match that level of control. Over 99% of ninjas lack the precision and spiritual power required for such a feat. Nathan's success hinged on the fact that his chakra control skill had just reached the peak of level 6. Moreover, as his shadow sword technique and mind-reading technique each attained perfection, his chakra proficiency surged by another 300 points, bringing him that much closer to level 7. Surveying the spotless courtyard, Nathan allowed himself a satisfied nod. Then he stepped into his training room, ready to push his limits even further. Nathan settled cross-legged on the training ground, the 4 secret technique scrolls laid out before him. He ran through his schedule in his mind and realized there was no way he could start working on them in the next few days. At best, he could dispatch a few shadow clones to study the new jutsu ahead of time. The reason was simple. His chakra was already committed to several high-level techniques. Water release, great exploding water colliding wave alone was an A-rank jutsu capped at proficiency level 9, and the flying thunder god technique, an S-rank forbidden art, couldn't exceed level 10. With so much energy directed at those skills, Nathan simply couldn't push himself to perfection in the new scrolls without throwing off his entire training regimen. Reluctantly, he decided to wait. Fortunately, he'd already invested months into mastering the 8 trigram sealing style. Barring any setbacks, he estimated it would reach its perfected level 9 state in about 10 days. Then, finally, he could turn his full attention to these 4 hidden secrets. Nathan calculated that, by mastering this new technique, he would instantly gain over 300,000 chakra points. If everything went according to plan, and if he could combine it with his other sealing jutsu, he'd be able to craft a container or scroll capable of binding the 7 tails. That would solve his chakra shortage once and for all. In theory, he wouldn't have to wait long. Taking a steadying breath, Nathan sealed his thoughts and formed the required hand signs. Shadow clone technique, he intoned. In an instant, a plume of chakra smoke billowed outward, and an identical copy of Nathan stood where he had been moments before. He studied the clone for a heartbeat, then said, "From here on, this is your mission." The duplicate bowed crisply. "Understood." With that settled, Nathan gathered up the 4 secret scrolls he'd spread on the ground, mentally reached out to the flying thunder god mark on the deserted island, and vanished in a flash of blue light. Deep within Uchiha territory, beyond the reach of Konoha's sensory network, no one witnessed his departure. Nathan wouldn't have dared to use the flying thunder god technique so casually inside the village. Its origins were far too questionable. He had only just slipped away, intent on returning to his solitary training, when, on the far side of Uchiha territory, events were unfolding at the Great Elder's residence. Inside the Great Study, the Uchiha clan's senior elder was absorbed in a stack of documents. A crisp knock sounded at the door. "Enter," the elder called without looking up. The door creaked open. A veteran Uchiha shinobi, older, with streaks of gray at his temples, stepped inside. Nathan would have recognized him instantly as the same elder who had scrutinized his credentials when he ventured into the clan's secret treasure room. Once the door clicked shut behind him, the great elder finally lifted his head and fixed his sharp gaze on his visitor. As the messenger's step ed into the chamber, a sudden gleam flickered in the Uchiha great elder's eyes. Leaning forward, his voice low but urgent, he asked, "Any discoveries?" The young shinobi bowed respectfully. "Reporting, great elder, I've made a small but significant find." He pressed a folded parchment into the elder's hand. The great elder unfolded it and scanned its contents in silence. Then he looked up, brow furrowed. "What am I looking at here?" "These," the messenger explained, "are the scrolls Nathan absconded with from the clan's secret vault earlier today." The moment those words registered, the great elder's pupils constricted. He peered again at the document, reading its list of forbidden techniques aloud in a tense whisper. Izanagi, Izanami, the transcription seal. Demonic illusion, mirror heaven and earth change. Even he had yet to master all 4 of these clandestine jutsu, let alone the legendary Izanagi and Izanami. In theory, an Uchiha might unlock them after opening the Mangekyo Sharingan, but in practice, almost no one possessed the necessary talent. Yet here they were, plainly catalogued on Nathan's stolen scrolls. The implications chilled him. Without awakening the Mangekyo Sharingan and harnessing its overwhelming ocular power, mastering those advanced techniques is simply impossible. Of course, any Uchiha who can open the Mangekyo is already supremely talented, but even they face hard limits. Consider the transcription seal and the demonic illusion, mirror heaven and earth change. The transcription seal demands full Mangekyo-level chakra control in the eyes, while mirror heaven and earth change requires an almost unparalleled gift for genjutsu. Even within the Uchiha, where illusion prowess runs deep, only a handful can truly learn it. And without the Mangekyo's instantaneous insight to pierce other people's illusions, studying it is almost wasted effort. At best, you end up with a watered-down version that's less effective than the standard Sharingan's built-in illusions. That dilemma explains why Mirror Heaven and Earth Change has remained all but forgotten. Those without talent find it useless, and those rare geniuses who could pull it off? None have shown up in the clan yet. Certainly not Nathan. So the technique has simply sat on the shelf, gathering dust. Having deliberately pursued all 4 Uchiha secret techniques, Nathan inevitably set off warning signals. From his vantage point, the Uchiha clan's great elder had been scrutinizing the ancient scrolls, each one a crystallization of forbidden power, and when he finally pieced together their significance, he couldn't contain his delight. He'd half expected something noteworthy when Nathan appeared, but he never imagined it would be this extraordinary. Nathan had actually awakened the Mangekyo Sharingan. Of course, the Great Elder had his suspicions. Nathan wasn't the kind of shinobi to dabble in arcane arts without a purpose. Selecting and mastering all 4 of the clan's most perilous jutsu at once required absolute confidence, and only someone who already possessed the Mangekyo could hope to succeed. Still, the scale of Nathan's achievement took him by surprise. He'd merely instructed a trusted sentinel in the vault to keep tabs on the youth's activities, never dreaming the outcome would be so spectacular. Meanwhile, Nathan remained entirely oblivious to how closely his progress was being monitored, or to the astonished exclamations echoing through the hidden chambers of the Uchiha estate. Even if Nathan knew they were watching, he wouldn't care. Anyone pursuing those 4 secret techniques was bound to draw attention, especially from perceptive Uchiha leaders. It wouldn't take long for someone to put 2 and 2 together and conclude he'd awakened the Mangekyo Sharingan. After all, the Uchiha have preserved their clan for millennia. They're hardly dullards. Give any astute elder a few breadcrumb clues, and they'll nail the truth 8 or 9 times out of 10. That's why Nathan hadn't rushed to present himself after receiving the pass from the Great Elder. So why make his move now? The answer was simple. He'd already perfected nearly every skill at his disposal and had no new techniques he was eager to train until his Mangekyo Sharingan advanced further. On top of that, having the 7 tails sealed within him provided a virtually limitless chakra reservoir. With that battery at his back, he could afford to wait until his Mangekyo Sharingan reached its next stage, something he expected to happen in less than a month. Only then would the timing be truly right for what he had planned. When the upgrade is complete, Nathan's Mangekyo Sharingan will be nothing more than a relic. His true ace will be the eternal Mangekyo Sharingan, free from any threat of blindness. Anyone foolish enough to bank on trapping him with his old weakness is in for a rude awakening. That's why Nathan remains utterly untroubled, though his composure doesn't mean nobody else is on edge. Inside the study, the Uchiha clan's great elder let out a booming laugh before his features sharpened into ice. Without a sound, he activated his Sharingan, its red eyes locking onto the nervous figure standing before him. "Who else knows about this?" he asked softly. The man bowed his head, voice trembling. "My lord, no one." The great elder tilted his head. "No one? My lord, truly, no one else is aware." A flicker of displeasure crossed the elder's face, but he remained silent for a moment, weighing his next words. Finally he asked, "Can this threat be erased?" "Absolutely," the man replied without hesitation. "Good." The elder nodded once, satisfied. "Then do as you must. Under no circumstances are you to let anyone discover Nathan's anomaly." A wave of relief washed over the man. "I understand, my lord." As the man turned to leave, the great elder closed his Sharingan, but in his eyes still lay a trace of unease. He knew that the longer this secret lingered, the greater the risk of unexpected complications. Kaseki didn't linger. After receiving a few final instructions, he bowed and slipped out to carry out the great elder's orders. But just as he reached the study door, the great elder's faint voice drifted after him. "Kaseki," the elder called, "you understand how vital Nathan is to our clan now, don't you? Don't fail me." It was the first time the great elder had ever addressed him by name, and the warning in his tone was unmistakable. Under no circumstances was this intelligence to be shared. Kaseki's shoulders twitched with a barely perceptible shudder, but he didn't dare turn back. "I wouldn't dream of it," he replied quickly. The Great Elder's low hum offered neither praise nor assurance. Satisfied that his warning had been heard, the elder fell silent. Kiseki eased the study door closed behind him and stepped away, his feet barely making a sound on the polished floor. Inside, the Great Elder remained seated at the desk. He set aside the reports he'd been studying, leaned back, and pressed his eyes to the ceiling, lost in thought. The candlelight danced across his stern features, underscoring the weight of the secret he now guarded so fiercely, and the extraordinary importance of Nathan, to the fate of the Uchiha clan. Nathan's gaze was unfocused, yet behind that slight daze burned an intense, almost unnerving clarity. Though he hadn't stepped beyond his estate in weeks, he knew exactly how the clan's fortunes had shifted. Since Minato Namikaze took office as Hokage, relations between the Uchiha and the rest of the village had thawed significantly. If not quite brotherly, then at least no longer openly hostile. And with Minato's bold reform agenda gaining traction, the divide continued to narrow. It was clear that if Namikaze's plans succeeded, restoring some trust to the Uchiha and reallocating a measure of rights and influence, the clan's radicals would be marginalized. Even the Great Elder, long seen as the hardliners' figurehead, had kept the peace. He could not deny that Minato was an extraordinary leader. Under Namikaze's steady guidance, the long-standing tension between village and clan finally seemed headed for a peaceful resolution. After all, no true shinobi, no matter how skilled in combat, ever truly relished war. Indeed, while a few will risk everything in the pursuit of power, most shinobi, Uchiha or otherwise, are simply ordinary people. They form the bedrock of our world's stability. In a realm where no one wields extraordinary abilities, a single gifted individual can tilt the balance of power. Yet, in this ninja world, where great strength concentrates in the hands of a few, even one or two prodigies can reshape history by force. Just look at how Hashirama Senju and Madara Uchiha's visions forged the one village, one country system. Their deeds prove that peace cannot rest on aspirations alone. It must be backed by true strength. For this reason, although the Uchiha Great Elder saw reasons for hope, he refused to abandon his precautions. His contingency plan had shifted. Instead of gathering a circle of like-minded disciples, he would reinforce his bond with Nathan. From Nathan's past actions, the Great Elder understood that this young man's loyalty could never be bought by bloodline alone, only earned through mutual trust and respect. Nathan understood the implication clearly. He would never again be bound by arbitrary clan edicts or the village's hidden agendas. True, this independence might seem unsettling at first, but it carried a priceless advantage. No longer at the mercy of the Hokage or Uchiha clan politics, he could forge his own destiny. Even better, by maintaining a strong alliance with the Uchiha, he would become a steadfast pillar for them to lean on. Should the worst ever befall him, his support, rooted in shared blood, would still protect the clan from ruin. The Great Elder's appraisal had been astute. Nathan harbored no qualms about coming to the Uchiha's aid when the time came. After all, his connection to their lineage ran deep. But those considerations could wait. Right now, there was only one priority: cultivation. Land of Fire, Southern Sea region, on that isolated island, time had become an illusion. Nathan had devoted himself to training without pause, and before he noticed, 3 full days had slipped by. Under the island's relentless sun and against its rugged terrain, he had refined his chakra flow, pushed the limits of his Sharingan, and honed new jutsu techniques. Every muscle, every cell of his body, felt both exhausted and exhilarated. He was transforming hardship into power, determination into mastery, and with every passing hour, he drew closer to the strength he would need for the trials ahead. Over the past 3 days, Nathan's core skills have advanced by leaps and bounds, and, remarkably, the 4 secret techniques he recently acquired have finally been inscribed on his skill panel. His shadow clones worked tirelessly through the night to decipher and record them. Unfortunately, Nathan himself hasn't had the time, energy, or chakra to train in those new techniques yet, so they remain locked at level 0 for the time being. That morning, just as Nathan was dispersing his shadow clones to continue their training, a sudden flash of memory popped into his mind. He blinked his eyes open, then quickly shut them again to review the incoming data. These memories weren't from the clones he'd sent out into the training field. They were from the team he'd left behind in the village. A summons. The Hidden Leaf had issued an urgent A-rank mission, and Nathan's presence was required in person. In the ninja world, missions are graded by difficulty, and an A-rank assignment is among the most dangerous. He'd need to take it on himself. No proxies or clones would do. Nathan stood silently for a moment, processing the implications. An A-rank emergency meant high stakes, tight deadlines, and substantial reward, but it also meant real peril. With a deep breath, he shook off the last vestiges of drowsiness. Duty came first. He gathered his chakra and summoned back his shadow clones, extinguishing their forms one by one until only his single main body remained. Strapping on his equipment in rapid, precise motions, Nathan's mind raced through every possible scenario. Whatever this mission was, it wouldn't wait, and neither would he. He sprinted toward the village's command post, determined to face whatever challenge lay ahead. Nathan sat quietly in the briefing room as the mission instructor outlined the 4 tiers of assignments a shinobi might receive. Each rank carried its own challenges and its own level of risk. D-level missions. These are the simplest, almost entirely risk-free tasks that serve as a novice's introduction to life outside the academy. A shinobi on a D-rank assignment might babysit young children, herd livestock, search for lost pets, or help with basic farm labor. Such chores teach responsibility, discipline, and the importance of teamwork without ever requiring a blade to be drawn. C-level missions. Once a ninja graduates to C rank, real combat potential comes into play, but usually not against trained enemy shinobi. Instead, these assignments involve confronting ordinary individuals who might pose a threat. Bandits, smugglers, or rogue mercenaries. Typical C-rank work includes escorting caravans, tracking down thieves, conducting reconnaissance, or guarding important figures. Teams are often led by an experienced chunin or a senior genin, giving younger ninjas a chance to learn fieldcraft under supervision. B-level missions. At this stage, the stakes rise sharply. A B-rank mission almost guarantees you'll face enemy shinobi whose skills rival your own. Here, stealth, strategy, and teamwork become vital, because, as the saying goes, the only one who truly understands a ninja is another ninja. These operations demand a seasoned eye and unwavering resolve. Squads are typically composed of proven genin alongside chunin, each member prepared to handle life-or-death encounters. Nathan folded his hands in his lap and let the information settle in. Every mission, no matter how minor it seemed, was a step toward mastering the art of the shinobi, and he was ready to take that first step. As ninjas, they can effortlessly overpower ordinary people with their chakra, but when the opposition is another ninja, everything changes. Strength, speed, technique, mental focus, even luck become critical factors, and a single misstep can mean death. That's why these missions are so perilous, and their outcomes so unpredictable. After all, it's human ingenuity, and in this case, ninjas wielding extraordinary power that makes miracles possible. To maximize both survival and success rates, such operations almost always require leadership from a senior chunin or jonin, supported by experienced genin. Take Naruto's first wave country escort mission as an example. It started as a low-level C-rank job, but was suddenly bumped to B rank. By every rulebook, their team didn't meet the criteria, yet they went ahead anyway, and what followed was nothing short of breathtaking. Facing off against a fearsome foe like Zabuza was daunting enough, but having Kakashi as their captain, far above the typical standard, made all the difference. The real reason the mission had felt so agonizing wasn't the objective itself, but the team's inexperience. Naruto and his friends were brimming with potential, Naruto especially, as the story's main protagonist, but without sufficient field time under their belts, even a routine B-rank job became an uphill battle. And remember, B rank is among the easier assignments. Step up to A rank, and the stakes rise dramatically. These missions demand finesse, teamwork, and a breadth of jutsu few shinobi possess. Beyond that, S rank tasks are in a league of their own. Each one typically centers on threats to entire nations or the hidden villages themselves. S rank really just means anything more dangerous than A rank, and there is literally no ceiling on how perilous they can get. Because of that, S-rank jobs fall exclusively to Kaji-level shinobi or legendary teams. Ordinary ninjas never touch them. For most shinobi, the toughest assignment you'll ever see is A rank, which, coincidentally, is precisely the level of the mission Nathan has just been assigned. An A-rank operation isn't something a solitary chonin should tackle alone. It's usually entrusted either to an elite jonin or to a squad of several experienced jonin working in concert. How exactly they organize depends entirely on the mission's particulars, and Nathan is about to find out just how exacting those particulars can be. There was no question that Nathan's latest assignment was a solo mission. As he finished studying the memory imprinted by his shadow clone, he couldn't help but furrow his brow. This job didn't just call for guarding someone important, it also meant navigating the village's tangled politics, both from within and beyond its borders. In other words, he'd need more than sheer strength. He'd need a sharp mind, too. And yet, the more Nathan's power grew, the more he resisted mental exertion. It wasn't that he was becoming reckless, far from it, but his daily training already exacted a brutal toll on his mind. The idea of hashing out complex strategies felt downright exhausting. Besides, he'd reached a point where raw force could bulldoze nearly any obstacle. Why squander energy on endless scheming when his strength alone could carry him through? With a decisive shake of his head, Nathan settled on a plan. This time, he would rely on muscle over mind. Nathan stood motionless for a moment, allowing his thoughts to settle. It was time to head back to the village, but first, he needed to dismiss his shadow clones. Focusing his mind, he dispelled the shadow clone technique in an instant. Every duplicate training along the shoreline dissolved into mist. The accumulated cultivation experience and memories they had gathered surged back into Nathan's consciousness all at once. He closed his eyes and took a deep breath, carefully sifting through the flood of information. For the next 10 minutes, he methodically digested the data, assimilating combat tactics, refining his elemental breathing, and embedding every nuance into his own skill set. When he finally opened his eyes, Nathan ran a quick check over his gear to make sure everything was in place. Then he reached out with his spiritual senses until he located the Flying Thunder God seal embedded in his home. With a single thought, he activated the technique. The world around him blurred, and in the blink of an eye, he reappeared inside his bedroom in the village. Standing before him was one of his shadow clones, still clutching a mission scroll. Nathan inclined his head in acknowledgement and took the scroll from the clone's hand, ready to embark on the next leg of his journey. Nathan broke the seal on the scroll and unfolded it, his eyes scanning each line with precision. On the surface, this mission was straightforward. Travel to the Land of Lightning and escort a single individual safely back to Konoha. In practice, however, the task was riddled with danger. The person in question was under close surveillance not only by the Hidden Cloud village, but also by factions within their own village. It wasn't out of the realm of possibility that by the time Nathan arrived, his quarry might already be dead. Even if he managed to extract this person, he would likely find himself caught between two hostile forces, besieged at every turn. The specifics of how he would accomplish the mission, if it could be done at all, hinged entirely on how events unfolded on the way. Why was so much manpower dedicated to this one target? The answer lay buried in the research notes of the second Hokage, Tobirama Senju. Widely celebrated as a pioneering genius, Tobirama had left behind discoveries that reshaped the ninja world. He devised the Flying Thunder God technique, now legendary through Minato Namikaze's mastery. He engineered the impure world reincarnation jutsu that would later threaten the very fabric of shinobi society. And he authored the shadow clone technique, the basis for 100,000 duplications seen today. And these, Nathan reminded himself, were merely the most famous among a trove of arcane studies that the second Hokage had hidden from all but his closest confidants. With the scroll's weighty implications pressing on him, Nathan rolled it up and secured it inside his pack. Dawn was still hours away, but there would be no rest until he accepted the mission's true measure of risk and prepared himself for the battles to come. After Tobirama Senju's death, the research he left behind had nearly filled an entire chamber. Perfected jutsu sat alongside half-finished techniques, and some scrolls contained nothing more than raw, embryonic ideas. Konohagakure's current mission focused on that last category. For years, the Hidden Cloud Village had recognized the value of Senju's work, especially the foundational sketches for Minato Namikaze's legendary Flying Thunder God technique, and secretly dispatched agents to steal portions of his archives. At first, Konoha remained oblivious. Then, by sheer chance, Nathan, a Konoha spy embedded deep within the Hidden Cloud Village, stumbled upon their covert laboratory. Following a trail of coded logs and half-burned scrolls, he unearthed not only the purloined Senju documents, but also evidence of something far more alarming, a prototype of a forbidden jutsu. The mission dossier offered no further details, only a stark warning that, once perfected, this technique could reshape the very face of Ba, TTL. Nathan had confirmed the intel beyond doubt. He'd destroyed the stolen research files, cut down the Kirigakure operatives behind the project, and made off with the last remaining data. Now, hunted by Hidden Cloud forces, his mission was clear: rendezvous with his contact and deliver them safely back to Konoha. At first glance, it sounded like a simple external extraction. Dodge the Cloud's patrols, smash through their defenses, and escape. In truth, the greater threat lay closer to home. The mole who first stole this sensitive research was still at large, and only someone deep within the village's ranks could have accessed such secrets. Nathan knew he had to guard against betrayal from his own side. That was why this assignment demanded more than brute strength. It demanded brains. Fortunately, Nathan had both in abundance. Once he located his contact, he planned to rely on sheer force to blast a clear path out of enemy territory. Satisfied with his strategy, he packed his gear, stowed away a few essential scrolls, and slipped quietly out of his quarters. Moments later, Nathan was already weaving through the streets, bound for the Konoha Gate, and whatever danger lay beyond it. Nathan could have dispelled his shadow clone back in the village and made a clean getaway from the island, straight to his destination. But dismissing the decoy so early would risk exposing his Flying Thunder God technique, and that was a gamble he refused to take. Besides, keeping the clone active served another purpose. It was the perfect bait to draw out any Hidden Cloud ninja spies. If they really were tailing him, they'd have no choice but to reveal themselves sooner or later, be it through an assault or a covert pursuit, and he could turn the tables by picking up clues about their numbers and methods. What's more, Nathan had just perfected a new jutsu, mind-reading technique, and he was itching to test it on unsuspecting targets. All he needed was for those spies to make a move before his shadow clone vanished. Yet, despite his reputation as the feared Demon Sword, or perhaps because that name still struck enough terror to keep them at bay, no one dared set an ambush. No one followed him on the road out of the village. In the end, his carefully laid trap came to nothing. The snake never showed its head. Nathan hovered on a narrow forest trail just beyond the gates of Konoha, his white Byakugan eyes sweeping the trees one last time. Finding no sign of pursuit, he let out a soft sigh. Without hesitation, he wove a series of quick hand seals and activated his chakra cloak. A pale aura flared around him as he channeled wind chakra into his limbs, forming glimmering wings at his back. In a heartbeat, he launched himself skyward, bound for the land of lightning. He'd ridden on foot with a full squad the last time he'd supported the front line, forced to navigate every valley and mountain pass. Today was different. Alone on this emergency mission, he could ignore all ground obstacles and simply fly above them. That unmatched mobility was precisely why Minato Namikaze had chosen him for the job. Apart from Minato's own Flying Thunder God technique, no one in the village could travel so swiftly, and even Minato's teleportation jutsu relied on pre-placed seals. He couldn't possibly mark the entire world. In sheer, unrestrained speed, Nathan had the clear advantage. As the forests shrank below him and the clouds rushed past, Nathan adjusted his chakra flow, watching the distant peaks of the Land of Lightning slowly rise on the horizon. Time was short, and every second counted. With a final, determined breath, he spurred himself forward, cutting through the sky like a blade. Sometimes the wind release technique, wind wings, proved even more convenient than teleportation. High above the land, Nathan watched the world rush away beneath him. He shook his head to dispel any lingering doubts and focused entirely on his course, the Land of Lightning. Flying at his peak speed of 300 meters per second, 18 kilometers per minute, or 1,080 kilometers per hour, Nat had covered ground nearly faster than the eye could follow. Between the land of fire and the land of lightning lay several small nations. In a straight line, the distance topped 2,000 kilometers. Once he factored in detours through villages and border crossings, the journey stretched well over 5,000 kilometers, almost half the circumference of the entire ninja world. No other shinobi could match Nathan's chakra reserves well enough to sustain continuous flight over such a vast span. If he'd been forced to walk and rest at intervals, by the time he reached his destination, his target would likely have been long dead. Soaring steadily onward, Nathan drew on every ounce of chakra in his body, determined to arrive in time.